Good morning, everyone. Welcome back for our exciting second day. We go straight. We start now, and I will leave our guest Ned Finning to make the presentation of his resume and our second presenter in this presentation, Mr. Wayne, which has a second outstanding resume. So, Ned and Wayne, welcome. Thank you very much. And I hand over the word for you.
Good morning. My name is Ned Finney, and Wayne Hembry is on here as well. I'm the current chairman for ASME Section 5, as starting in July of this year. And Wayne was the most recent previous chairman, who was chairman for a number of years. We appreciate the invitation to come and speak with you today about ASME and some of the changes that are going on in the NDE world in Section 5. I've been a member of the ASME codes and standards since 2007 and involved in NDE since 1983. Currently, I'm a member, vice chairman, or chairman on over 18 committees, including the Board on Nuclear Codes and Standards, the Technical Oversight Management Committee, and current chairman of the NDE book, which is Boiler Pressure Vessel Section 5. My NDE credentials go back to my beginnings in '83, and currently I'm an ASNT Level 3 in ultrasonics and leak testing. I first qualified in Level 3 ASNT in 1991, and my radiography, mag particle, and liquid penetrant are currently expired. So when we get through with COVID, I'm going to have to go take some more tests. My experience ranges from fabrication to in-service inspection. I've done a number of things for NASA, worked at nuclear power plants, both as an inspector, vendor, as well as working for the utility, done refinery work, chemical plant work, piping manufacturer, and consulting in many areas. Previously certified in eddy current, visual welding, in-service inspection, visual, VT123, and QC inspection methodologies as well. I started my career in concrete, soils, civil testing. And I'll let Wayne go through his resume.
Thank you, Ned. I started out many years ago in 1967, being continuously employed in NDE. I first had a special class put on by the Department of Energy called physical testing, non-destructive and destructive testing at the Union Carbide at that time Y12 production facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. It just happened to be where that they had the Manhattan Project. For those people who have read their history, it's where the atomic bomb was manufactured during World War II. I got out of there, employed by Commercial Test Lab. I spent a little bit of time in the U.S. Army. I was fortunate to parlay my background and work on military aircraft during the Vietnam era. Upon discharge, I worked with a large pipe fabricating outfit in South Carolina for almost a year. Then from there, I went to combustion engineering at their nuclear facility in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I got my first level 3 by examination then. I took my first ASNT level 3 in '76 when I transferred to the Construction Services Division of Combustion. And I became the NDE manager for worldwide operations. After 11 years in Connecticut, I got an opportunity to move back to Tennessee, my home state, even though I traveled tremendously, national and international, for combustion construction services. But I moved back to Chattanooga and was gainfully employed for almost 28 years with Tennessee Valley Authority as the only federal government utility. prior to my departure at the end of 13, I was the principal NDE level 3 on 3 steam generator replacements, 2 at Sequoia Nuclear Power Plant and 1 at Watts Bar. I didn't realize it until later in my career that I've met very, very few people that's had both manufacturing, construction, and utility experience in NDE of the power industry. So that was a plus from cradle to grave, so to speak, in the power industry. Recently performed as adjunct professor at Chattanooga State Community College, teaching the NDE course. After I retired, my phone kept ringing. I decided, well, I'm going to start a company. So I'm also owner of Industrial Image Interpretation Consulting. I specialize in all of the construction codes concerning image code compliant. I've been twice elected chair of ASME Standards Committee 5 and on various committees, including Tom C. And I've been involved with ASME code for over 40 years. Thanks, Ned. I'll turn it back to you. And by the way, Ned really put forth a lot of work in both of us collaborating on this. So I'm just a co-speaker with him, and I'm going to sit silent until he calls upon me. Thank you.
So we publish the ASME Section 5 every 2 years. The 2019 edition was published in July of 2019, and the 2021 edition will come out in July of next year. We are just finishing everything up so that it has to be complete by the end of the first week of December of this year so that it can be published, go through all of its editorial stuff, and be on the street in July of next year. Recently found a good quote that was the ASME president in February of 1968 said that ASME accepts responsibility for the technical excellence of any code it sponsors and for the suitability as a basis for regulation, but ASME cannot itself regulate or enforce, a fact which needs constantly to be remembered. So we can write the rules, but it's really up to the individual implementation companies and individuals to enforce the rules, to understand the rules, and to follow the rules. And that's really an important thing for us all to remember. So ASME Section 5 has 20 members on the Standards Committee. It also has a number of subgroups, working groups, task groups, and such. There's about 86 individuals that are involved in developing the consensus code that we call ASME Section 5. The representation of our membership on the Standards Committee, which is the highest level committee for Section 5, is broken down: designers, constructors, general interest, insurance and inspection companies, manufacturers of materials, regulatory, users, and utilities. Wayne and I both happen to be utility representatives. And I also note that Wayne and I are also part of that small group of people that have built nuclear power plants, built conventional power plants, been involved in operation of nuclear and conventional power plants, and been involved in other fabrication all the way from building the piping to seeing it installed and having the systems in service. Wayne, if you'd like to talk about the forward section, I'll turn this over to you. Just tell me when you want to switch through the numbers.
One of the presentations yesterday, they gave a pretty good history on ASME. It really started in the Industrial Revolution of the entire world, but primarily in the United States. And the first major thing was the sinking of the steamboat, the Sultana, and there's various counts of how many people lost their life. You can do the research on that. The engineers got together in New York City in 1883, and that was really when ASME was started. But the first actual publication was in 1911. The American Society of Mechanical Engineers established the Boiler and Pressure Vessel Committee to formulate the standard rule for construction of steam boilers and other pressure vessels. Why the steam boilers? Well, at that particular time, there were locomotives. They were steam boilers in factories and schools and just all over the country, and they were not regulated. Matter of fact, from materials and things of that nature, if you had a boat made in one part of the country, then the nut for that boat could be made someplace else, and there's no consistency on actual manufacturing. So with that, ASME was formed in 1911. Going down to present in 2009, we had a reformation of the Boiler and Pressure Vessel Committee. Before that, each of the committees listed, alpha through K here, A through K, were subcommittees. At that time, they reported to a overall standards committee. At that time in 2009, they made each committee a standalone committee. So we have what is referred to within Boiler Pressure Vessel Committee code sections and support code sections. The construction code, and I'm going to jump through these a little bit. Committee on Power Boilers is section 1. They're the construction code. They tell you who, the requirements of the people that's doing the work, the why, the when it's to be examined, and they also reference the how. The how for it to be examined for NDE is section 5. They will turn to section 5 and the various NDE methods. We'll get to that later on. Section 3 for Committee on Construction of Nuclear Facilities is also one of the construction codes. Section 4 is for heating boilers. There's very little NDE in that, and most of you could imagine why. It's because of operating temperature and pressure. It doesn't require to determine that the integrity of that component has to be as worthy as that of a power boiler or a pressure vessel. I'll go down then to section 8. It's the Committee on Pressure Vessels. Likewise, there's a lot of NDE there. Well, another committee overlooked as a support code is the Committee on Materials, section 2. You really have 3 primary support codes. That's on materials for section 2, which includes welding and welding electrodes, etc. Brazing is part of welding and all that. That was covered a little bit yesterday. So we got section 9 is actually the code on welding, brazing, and fusion. It tells you that a welder coupon must be examined when a welder makes a weld to be qualified and certified. It gives you 2 options, whether it's a mechanical bend test or a volumetric examination. It used to say radiography. In the last 10, 11 years, it was changed to volumetric. Then we have transport tanks. That's a construction code. The one that's used quite a bit of NDE is section 11. It's nuclear in-service inspection. Now, all of these committees report technically to the TOMC, T-O-M-C. It's the Technical Oversight Management Committee. The reason we did that, we got away from the old Standards Committee. And anytime something happened to one code, whether it was a minor editorial change, it went through the old Standards Committee. They were overwhelmed with the amount of work that that committee had to oversee. So the decision was made that a committee would be set up for only reviewing the technical aspects of the committees for that report to TOMC. So that's the way it stands now and has worked very well for quite a few years, where each of the committees listed, they're the final say, but items of technical nature does go to TOMC, and then it goes to the board for approval, and then it'll go out for review and comment, and then it will be published. So next slide. where reference is made to committee in the forward section, and the reason we want to talk a little bit about this is that the forward section is the same in all of those standards committees listed. But the forward section, each of these committees include individual and collectively. The committee's function is to establish the rules of safety that's relating to pressure integrity, which governs the construction of boilers, pressure vessels, transport tanks, and nuclear components, and the in-service inspection of nuclear components and transport tanks. So when I say these words, then in your mind, you should reflect back to boilers, section 1, pressure vessels, section 8, transport tank, section 10, nuclear components, section 3, then in-service inspection. That's not a construction code, it's in-service nuclear. So you can see how that it applies, and you can also see the main focus is on safety. The committee also interprets rules for questions that arise regarding to their intent. Each committee, we meet 4 times a year, primarily in February, May, August, and November timeframe. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had our last boiler and pressure vessel committee. When we met in person, it always exceeded 1,000 people in attendance. The main hotel had to accommodate quite a large number because of meeting rooms, and et cetera. And this is a week-long, people rolling up their sleeves and meeting face-to-face to discuss changes with the code. Now, with the material codes, I want to say at this time that they are really regarded as a living document as well as the rest of the code. But the support codes, as you review it, they have the latest and greatest that's been accepted by the committee and by the code that talks about the material aspect, the most recent materials that's been approved for use. Section 5 has the most recent up-to-date NDE that the construction codes have so referenced or mandated within their books. We go on down, it says that the committees interpret these rules when questions arise regarding their intent. I don't think we have a slide in here, but within each code that gives you direction how to submit an inquiry to the ASME code. And it gives clear direction on how to do that. It's quite simple. You can fill it out online. If you have a question concerning about something with NDE on section 5, then, there's guidance there. There's also a way that you can contact people on the code to ask for assistance. Technical consistency of section of the code and coordination and standards development activities of the committees is supported and guided by technical oversight committee, as I previously said. Next slide. I'll go a couple more, Ned, then I'll hand it back to you. This is continuing the forward section. The code does not address other safety issues related to the construction of power boilers, pressure vessels, transport tanks, nuclear components, or in-service inspection nuclear components or transport tanks. Users of the code should refer to pertinent code standards, laws, regulations, and other relevant documents for safety issues other than those relating to pressure integrity. Again, that's first and foremost, safety and pressure integrity with ASME. Except for section 11 and 12, and with few other exceptions, the rules do not, of practical necessity, reflect the likelihood and consequence of deterioration in service related to specific service fluids or external operating environments. In formulating the rules, the committee considers the need of the users, manufacturers, and inspectors of pressure vessels. The objective of the rule is to afford reasonably certain protection of life and property and to provide a margin of deterioration in service to give a reasonable long and safe period of usefulness. Advancements in design, materials, and evidence of experience have been recognized. Next slide.
Gotcha.
This one is okay. Yeah, this one is a lot of the meat to the forward section. This code contains mandatory requirements, specific prohibitions, and non-mandatory guidance for construction activities and in-service inspection and testing activities. The code does not address all aspects of these activities, and those aspects that are not specifically addressed should not be considered prohibited. The code is not a handbook and cannot replace education, experience, and the use of engineering judgment. The phrase engineering judgment refers to technical judgments made by knowledgeable engineers experienced in the application of the code. Engineering judgments must be consistent with the code philosophy, and such judgments must never be used to overrule mandatory or specific prohibition of the code. This is real clear, where that, for example, I indicated the construction codes indicate what is required to be examined. And for those of you that may be working with Section 1, you'll realize that in the PW section that stands for parts welded, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later, has an area that delineates, it indicates what wells are required to examine and what wells are not from a volumetric examination standpoint, meaning either or radiography or ultrasonics. In this country, in the United States and around the world, a lot of these wells, manufacturers still want some examination performed to help ensure quality, as if they're trying to inspect quality into it. You can't, you have to build quality into it. Well, what I'm saying there is if you have water wall tubes for a steam plant, a fossil plant, they are outside the scope of the code. So that means that the NDE level 3s engineers and the cognizant engineer that's over that plant really need to get together and say, hey, what are we going to use for an acceptance criteria? Because the acceptance criteria contained in Section 1 is only for those wells that are required to be examined. What are we going to do for these other wells that are not required to be examined? They realize that by doing any examination, that's beyond the scope of the code. So they will sit down and come up with a meaningful examination other than what is required by the code, and the required inspections and examinations are a visual exam of every completed well and a hydrostatic examination. So they will select a few of each welder as an example to examine. Okay, again, the code is not a handbook. I'm going down the middle of this slide, and cannot replace education, experience, and the use of engineering judgment. That's real important to realize. I'll finish this slide. Ned, if you want to take it over.
Well, if I can get it to advance now, I'll be fine. There we go.
Okay, I'll take this. I had one more, didn't realize it.
Yep.
The committee recognizes that tools and techniques used for design and analysis change as technology progresses, and expects engineers to use good judgment in the application of these tools. The designer is responsible for complying with the code rules and demonstrating compliance with code equations when such equations are mandatory. The code neither requires nor prohibits the use of computers for the design or analysis of components constructed to the requirements of the code. However, designers and engineers using computer programs for design or analysis are cautioned that they are responsible for all technical assumptions inherent in the programs that they use and the application of these programs to their design. Obviously, this was added some 15 or 20 years ago, because prior to probably 1985, 88 timeframe, there were not that many computers that were used in the design calculations. Next slide.
I'm there. This is the next slide, Wayne.
Okay. The rules were established by the committee are not to be interpreted as approving, recommending, or endorsing any proprietary or specific design, or as limiting in any way the manufacturer's freedom to choose any method of design or any form of construction that conforms to the code rules. I'll stop here a second. You can see also I spoke section 1, but the same thing for section 3 and section 8. There are many well joint configurations design listed. The code is not going to tell the certificate holder which one to use. It's up to the certificate holder's design people to determine what's required. They really need to work in concert with the NDE people, because we found in the 60s and early 70s that a lot of wells were manufactured that made it really difficult once it was completed for the NDE people to get in there and examine it. So in the last 15, 20 years, I've seen a synergy, for lack of a better term, a cohesiveness between the engineers and the NDE people. Especially in this country, I'm aware that engineering courses are including NDE within a lot of the engineering for future examinations, especially in nuclear. To continue, it says the committee regularly meets to consider revisions of the rules, new rules as dictated by technological development, code cases, and requests for interpretation. Only the committee has the authority to provide official interpretations of the code. Requests for revisions, new rules, code cases, or interpretations shall be addressed to the secretary in writing and shall give full particulars in order to receive consideration and action. Proposed revisions to the code resulting from inquiries will be presented to the committee for appropriate action, and they will be responded to the inquirer, and they will be published. One other thing, when it talks about the committee regularly meets, that the code and only the code has the authority to provide interpretations, Ned nor myself as members of the code cannot speak on behalf of the code. If we are asked what is our opinion on something, we always must preface that, in our opinion, this is what we're saying. Now, if you need a code interpretation, we'll tell you how to go about writing the interpretation to get an official rule on what your concern is. I believe this is the last one of the forward.
Yes, it is.
The rules established by the committee are not to be interpreted as approving, recommending, or endorsing any proprietary or specific design, or as limiting in any way the manufacturer. I've already read this one.
Yeah.
I thought, was this the last one we had?
Yeah, I'll take over on the next one.
Okay, appreciate it.
So,
Thank you.
ASME Section 5 is broken up into many different articles, and each of the articles cover different topics. They cover different methodologies for applying non-destructive examination. They have separate sections that are used in different ways. But Article 1 is the general requirements. And general requirements, they apply to application of NDE across the board. Anything within the book, Article 1 applies to all of it. So there are requirements that apply to radiography, as well as liquid penetrant, as well as acoustic emissions. It covers all of it. It also goes in and talks about the way that you qualify procedures and personnel and equipment in order to be able to use it for a given technique within a method. So a method would be radiography, ultrasonics, mag particle, liquid penetrant, leak testing, all of those. Within radiography, you would have techniques. You have DR, CR, film radiography. Within ultrasonics, you have conventional radiographies, you have conventional ultrasonics, you have time of flight, phased array. Now we've got the FMC and other methodologies that we have put in there. It's a continuously updating, changing, improving code book. I think we're currently at 900 and, what is it, Wayne? 920 something pages.
I think it was 922 last time I looked.
The original code in 1971 was probably 50 pages.
That is correct. And by the way, I was going to mention earlier, and I'm glad you brought it up. This coming year is Section 5's 50th anniversary. It's fairly short time in consideration that the first code came out in 1911, 109 years ago. So the question begs us, we've got to ask, well, what was done prior to 1971? The construction codes contained within that code the NDE requirements. When Section 5 originated in 1971, a lot of these methodologies, the how-to, was transferred from that code to Section 5. And we are where we are today as a result of it. Again, we are a support code for the construction code.
It's interesting to point out also that Section 11, the in-service nuclear code, had their 50th anniversary last year. And only one of the original committee members for Section 11 when it was started is still alive. And Mr. Owen Hedden lives in Fort Worth, Texas. And he was one of my mentors when I started code work in 2007, 2008 timeframe, and is still alert and able to give his opinions on things even at this age. And
likewise, he's one of my mentors. I first met him in '72, which meant that he was already on Section 5. He was part of the original Section 5 as well.
So he's probably one of the only remaining original Section 5 members. I don't know about Mr. Al Burks, but there are few of the original members. We have got a couple of people. Mr. Frank Sattler is still involved in the code committees. And I believe when he started his career, he was actually working with Mr. Firestone in the development of some of the early NDE methodologies back in the 40s and 50s.
That's correct. And
they've got quite a history and resume there.
We got Mr. McGoy that passed away a few years ago, and likewise he'd worked with Dr. Sperry and Dr. Firestone.
Let's get back to Section 5 general requirements. So the scope, general, equipment, procedure, calibration, examination and inspections, evaluation, records and documentation, and then the mandatory appendices. And mandatory means that they must be followed. They must be utilized. So mandatory appendix 1 is our glossary of terms for non-destructive examination. We used to have definitions contained throughout the document, and they were used in different ways depending on which methodology you were in. They were scattered to the four winds, basically. And we, a few years ago, I guess it's a number of years ago now, decided to bring all the definitions into Article 1 and divide them out so that they apply to each of the methodologies. And then mandatory appendix 2 was brought about because we were addressing a revision of the ASNT document, SNT TC1A, but that document did not contain information about digital radiography, computed radiography, phased array ultrasonics, or time of flight ultrasonics. And we needed to have a document that would contain the requirements for training and testing and experience for those methodologies. So we wrote mandatory appendix 2. Recently, we endorsed the 2016 edition of SNT TC1A, but there's always been some argument over if the recommended practice TC1A says you should do something, is that a requirement or not? So in our mandatory appendix, we said this should becomes a shall when it's implemented in Section 5. And that was the major change that we made in developing mandatory appendix 3. The other item I don't know how many of you are aware of the British Institute of Non-Destructive Testing issue that we had. I think it was in 2015. I've got a slide later that we can talk about that. There was over 3,000 examiners that they had found were certified and given qualification records that had basically bought their cert. They never went to the training. They didn't have the experience. They didn't take the examinations, but they had a card or a cert that said they were qualified. And in reaction to that, we figured we had to do something, because once you're certified, you can continue being certified through continued satisfactory performance without ever taking an exam, without ever proving that you know what you're supposed to know. So a lot of what we did in Mandatory Appendix 3 was a reaction to that event. It was a reaction to over 3,000 unqualified people claiming to be qualified to do non-destructive examination. And we didn't want to have that infection, that cancer, go throughout our entire industry and affect all of us. It was determined that some of the individuals that had gotten fraudulent certs had then come to the ASNT, and they had gotten into ASNT based off of their other certifications. So it was spreading already. Now, I believe they did an effective job to contain it. They did an effective job to make people go out and prove they were qualified, or weed out the ones that were not, remove the ones that were not qualified. So Mandatory Appendix 3 is exceptions to the published S&T TC1A and additional requirements. Mandatory Appendix 4 is exceptions to CP 189, which there's a difference between TC1A and CP 189 in that CP 189 is a standard. It is a set of requirements, whereas TC1A is a recommended practice, a recommended methodology of doing things. And there is a difference between a standard and a recommended practice. Non-mandatory Appendix A is a pretty good table that lists the type of imperfection and the type of NDE that can be used to find it. And we'll go over that as well. So in the scope, I've just taken some excerpts and highlights. In the scope of Article 1, this section of the code contains requirements and methods for non-destructive examination, which are code requirements to the extent that they are specifically referenced and required by other code sections or referencing documents. So if Section 1 says, go to Section 5 to determine how to do radiography, Section 1 has to tell you when to do it, where to do it, and how to accept it. But Section 5 tells you how to perform the examination. So in reality, Section 5 is the how-to, and the referencing code books, whether that be Section 3, Section 8, Section 11, Section 1, B31.1, B31.3, they are the when to do it, what area to examine, and how often do you examine it. Now, many of the codes and standards, you perform examination once and you're done, one time for the life of that component. But we've also realized that in some cases you need to do fitness for service. You need to do in-service inspection. You need to do other things as components continue to last longer and longer, as we continue to find defects and flaw mechanisms that are attacking our piping and our vessels that we didn't realize would exist when we first fabricated things. So these NDE methods are intended to detect surface and internal imperfections in materials, welds, fabricated parts, and components. Non-mandatory Appendix A is a list of common imperfections and damage mechanisms and the NDE methods that are generally capable of detecting them. Scope continued. B, general terms refer For general terms, refer to mandatory appendix 1. New additions to section 5 may be used beginning with the date of issuance, and they become mandatory 6 months after the date of issuance unless modified by referencing documents. So what that means is next July, when they publish the 2021 edition, you can start using it. But in January of 22, it becomes a requirement. So don't wait until December of 21 to start looking at the newly published section 5, because the requirements will go into effect unless your referencing documents tell you not to take them into effect. And in most cases, for section 8 vessels, for most section 1, those sort of things, you will be required to use the new requirements of the published 2020 edition in January of 2022. That's an important change that has been in place for a number of years, but it's not something that people realize until they go, oh my goodness, this is now the rule. T120 is general, and subsection A describes the methods of non-destructive examination to be used if referenced by other code sections or referencing documents. Subsection B lists the standards, the ASTM standards that cover non-destructive examination methods, which have been accepted as standards by section 5. The standards in subsection B are not mandatory unless specifically referenced in whole or in part in subsection A.
Ned, you need to advance the slide.
Code sections and referencing documents. This is an important thing in that people often go to the ASTM standard that is referenced and say, well, this says to do that, and section 5 says to do something else. You follow section 5 if you're doing work in accordance with section 5. So the standards published in subsection B are only required to the level that they are addressed in the main text. Were you going to say something, Wayne?
Yeah, I thought you need to go to the next slide. There you go.
There we go. Any reference to a paragraph of any article in subsection A of this section includes all the applicable rules in the paragraph. In every case, reference to a paragraph includes all the subparagraphs and subdivisions under that paragraph. So if it says do something in accordance with T120, you have to comply with T21A, T20A, T20B, T20C, T20D, every subsection, a subparagraph. Reference to a standard contained in subsection B is mandatory only to the extent specified. So that was the point I was making on the previous slide. Thank you, Wayne. Subparagraph E of T120 says, for those documents that directly reference this article for the qualification of NDE personnel, qualification shall be in accordance with the employer's written practice. You must have a written practice for your company, and it shall be in accordance with one of the following documents: SNTTC 1A, ASNT CP 189, as amended by mandatory appendix 3 or as amended by mandatory appendix 4. Now, T120F, which is referenced by several codes, also says that national or international central certification programs, such as the ASNT Central Certification Program or ISO 9712, 2012, and that's important to know that you're compliant with 2012, may be alternatively used to fulfill training, experience, and examination requirements of the documents listed in paragraph E, which is the previous paragraph, TC1A, CP189, as specified in the employer's written practice. You still have to have a written practice, even if you have a central certification program. In addition to the requirements described in E and F above, if the techniques of computer radiography, digital radiography, phased array, ultrasonic time of flight, or ultrasonic full matrix capture are used, the training experience examination requirements found in Article 1, Mandatory Appendix 2 shall also be included in the employer's written practice for each technique as applicable. Alternatively, performance-based qualification programs in accordance with the ANDI standard may be used for training, experience, examination, certification activities as specified in the written practice. Still have to have a written practice. It is a requirement. When referencing code section does not specify qualifications or does not reference directly Article 1 of this section, qualifications may simply involve a demonstration to show that personnel performing the non-destructive examination are competent to do so in accordance with the organization's established procedures. The user of this article is responsible for the qualification and certification of NDE personnel in accordance with the requirements of this article. The organization's quality program shall stipulate how this is to be accomplished. So the company is responsible for the qualification of their NDE personnel.
Ed,
Hire a vendor, the company is still responsible.
I'd like to insert as an example. After I retired and started my company, another company hired me to evaluate some radiographic images. They liked my interpretation and knowledge of the code better than the contractor that they were using, and wanted me to sign off on acceptance. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that. And I had read their written practice, and their written practice indicated the only people that had taken their exam, either full-time or temporary employment, could do so. And then they realized the shortcoming. And the only way I could end up having the final say on the quality of their wells was to take their examination.
Which is not a problem.
That's not a problem, but it goes to show the reason behind it is that they didn't know if my level 3 was in the type of work that they were doing or not. I could have been heavy into fossil work, Section 1 and Section 8 pressure vessels, but I'm working on a nuclear job. So what information, what knowledge, what experience did I have on nuclear? That was not I just gave an example. So that's the reason for having a written practice and making sure that the individuals have been examined accordingly.
Well, and another important point there, Wayne, and for those that are listening, if you hire a contract company to come in and provide NDE services for you, you still have to have a written practice. And that contract company's written practice has to meet or exceed the requirements of your written practice in order for them to perform NDE for you. Subparagraph J, qualifications in accordance with prior editions of S&T TC1A or CP189 are valid until recertification. Recertification or new certification shall be in accordance with the edition of TC1A or CP189 specified in E above. When any of the techniques included in G above are used, the additional requirements of the paragraph shall also apply. That's the use of mandatory appendix. And then finally, paragraph K, limited certifications in non-destructive examination personnel who do not perform all of the operations of a non-destructive method consists of more than one operation, or who perform limited scope, may be based on fewer hours of training and experience than recommended in TC1A or CP189. So if you're using personnel that are performing simply ultrasonic thicknesses, or they are performing they set up and make an exposure for radiography, but they don't interpret the radiographic images, then they don't have to have as much training and experience as someone who does the whole thing. T120L is basically what we say is you can use US customary units or SI units, metric units, for compliance to all these requirements. However, if you're going to use one or the other, you don't need to be mixing them and coming up, because the conversion between metric units and US customary units are not, they're not equal. You have to do a lot of work to make them equal. So I work as well in metric as I do in US customary units, but I don't work in both at the same time. When SI units are selected, US customary values in reference specifications that do not contain SI units shall be converted to SI to at least 3 significant digits. So 0.001 is how far out you need to take your conversion. So that completes T120. There's a lot of information there, and it takes a while to get through all of it. T130 is about equipment, and the general requirement for equipment is that it is the responsibility of the code user to ensure that examination equipment being used conforms to the requirements of this code section. Each article contains specific equipment requirements for the methods being applied. Those last words are not in the code, but that's what it means. T150, this is procedure. When required by the referencing code, all non-destructive examination performance of this code section shall be performed following a written procedure. A procedure demonstration shall be performed to the satisfaction of the inspector. When required by reference code, personnel demonstration may be used to verify ability of examiner to apply the examination procedure. Examination procedures shall comply with the applicable requirements of this section for the particular examination method. So each of the following articles have requirements of what has to be in the given procedures. Written procedures shall be made available to the inspector on request, and at least one copy of each procedure shall be readily available to the non-destructive examination personnel for their reference and use. So inspector on request, but examiners have to have access to one. Non-destructive examination methods and techniques included in this section are applicable to most geometric configurations and materials encountered in fabrication under normal conditions. So most configurations under normal conditions. However, special configurations or materials require modified methods and techniques. The organization shall develop special procedures which are equivalent or superior to the methods and techniques described in this code, and which are capable of producing interpretable examination results under the special conditions. Such special procedures may be modifications or combinations of methods described or referenced in this code section. A procedure demonstration shall be performed to verify the technique is capable of detecting discontinuities under special conditions equal to the capabilities of a method when used under more general conditions. That's a code requirement. If you're doing something that is not normal geometric configuration or normal conditions, then you're using a special procedure and you have to demonstrate it. Such special procedures may be modification combinations described, referenced in this code. Procedure demonstration shall be performed to verify the techniques capable. That may be a repeat of the previous one. These special procedures shall be submitted to the inspector for acceptance when required by the referencing code, and shall be adopted as part of the manufacturer's quality control program. When a referencing code section requires an examination to be performed in accordance with the requirements of this section, it is the responsibility of the organization to establish non-destructive examination procedures and personnel qualifications and certification procedures conforming to the referenced requirements. When qualifications of written examination procedure are required by the referencing code section, and you'll notice that a lot of things we say required by the referencing code section, because Section 5 being a support code, much like Section 2 and Section 9, we are the how you do it, and then different people point to Section 5 depending on their code needs.
If I can interject, Ned, an example of this is that for years, the procedure used for radiography, the referencing code accepts the completed radiograph as evidence that the procedure was demonstrated, it was met. That's the end result, and that's the only example within Section 5 that the inspector wants to say, hey, can you achieve the radiographic quality? Have you got your densities? Do you have the proper IQI? Is it visible? So on and so forth. This is not a special procedure we were talking about before, but this is when qualification of a written exam procedure is required. Some codes do not require written examination of radiography. They only merely indicate that the completed radiograph is an example that you had a procedure and it was achieved.
One of the things that we've always pointed out in the ultrasonic world is how you qualify a radiography exam is you show the penetrometer, the density, and the T-hole. And how you qualify an ultrasonic procedure is you go out and build a bunch of specimens with artificial flaws or real flaws, and you scan them and you go through a full qualification. And we've always thought it was like not the most fair thing in the world, but there is a difference in what is accepted and how it's practiced. And the world we live in is the world we live in.
And the construction code reference and how it's to be done.
So T150 Delta, T150D, talks about how you would qualify written procedure when this paragraph is referenced. And there are some codes that reference T150D as how you qualify your procedure. This qualification is performed under control and supervision of a level 3 examiner who's qualified and certified, performing the examination method and technique specified by the procedure. It has to be witnessed by the inspector. The supervising level 3 may be an employee of a qualifying organization or a subcontractor organization. On a minimum of one test specimen having flaws whose size, location, orientation, quantity, and characterization have been determined prior to the demonstration and are known only to the supervising level 3, you have to qualify your procedure. Minimum acceptable flaw size, required flaw orientation, minimum number of flaws shall be as specified by the referencing code section. Natural flaws are preferred over artificial flaws whenever possible. The qualification is also performed by a level 2 or level 3 examiner other than the supervising level 3, who is qualified and certified to perform the examination method and technique specified in the written procedure. So you have to have a level 2 or 3 that performs the exam, and you have to have a level 3 and the inspector to perform oversight of the exam in order for this procedure to be qualified. Procedure shall be considered qualified when the supervising level 3 and the inspector are satisfied that indications produced by the demonstrated procedure effectively reveal the size, location, orientation, quantity, and characterization of the flaws known to be present in the examined test specimen. And the qualification demonstration shall be documented as required by the referencing code section and by this section as set forth in the applicable article for the examination method and applicable appendix for the specific examination technique. Qualification documents shall be annotated to indicate qualification of written procedure and identify the examined test specimen. Name and/or entity and signature of supervising level 3 and the witnessing inspector shall be added to indicate their acceptance of the procedure qualification. That's the end of T150. T160, calibration. The organization shall assure that all equipment calibrations required by subsection A and/or subsection B as required, as referenced, are performed. Special procedures that are developed, T150A, code users shall specify what calibration is necessary. Additional calibration requirements are in all of the additional articles for the specific method, and in more so even in the mandatory appendices for the techniques.
After this section, Ed, we ought to take a break.
All right. I think I've got the same slide there. So pick back up T17.
Yeah.
Antonio, 5
Yes.
minutes.
10-minute break.
10 minutes break. It's
10 minutes
fine.
break. All right.
So we'll be back here at 10:40, people. 10:40, we'll be back. And you can take
All
the
right.
opportunity to write questions to our presenters.
And I'm going to get another cup of coffee.
Okay.
Me too.
Indeed.
We can resume the presentation.
All right. So T170 is examination and inspections. And the inspector concerning with the fabrication of a vessel or pressure part shall have the duty of verifying the inspectors to the inspector's satisfaction that all examinations required by the referencing code section have been made to the requirements of this section and the referencing documents. The inspector shall have the right to witness any of these examinations to the extent stated in the referencing documents. Throughout this section of the code, the word inspector shall be as defined and qualified as required by the referencing code section or referencing documents. And if I can get this thing to work. There. There's a special distinction established in various codes between inspection and examination. And the simple definition that I've always used is inspection is something you watch and examination is something that you perform. Personnel performing them is also adopted in this code. So in other words, the term inspection applies to functions performed by the inspector. The term examination applies to those quality control functions performed by personnel employed by the organization. One area of occasional deviation in these distinctions exists, and that's in the ASTM standards. The ASTM standards incorporate the word inspection, inspector, and often they're talking about the person who is performing an examination. ASME doesn't modify, for the most part, ASTMs that we publish. They own them. It's their world. So the ASTM documents, users of this code section shall recognize that the terms inspection, testing, examination in ASTM documents in subsection B do not describe duties of the inspector, but rather things to be done by the organization's examination personnel. Bottom line is the ASTMs use the word inspector to mean examiner in most cases.
If I may add, another way to look at it is the inspector, in many cases in this country, is the authorized inspector. They're the police that make sure that the examiners and the certificate holder follows the code rules. The examiner is one that has responsibility for disposition, accept, reject. The inspector to ASME with that AI or ANII concerning nuclear, authorized nuclear inspector, they do not have that responsibility or authority to accept or reject a weld or component based on quality, if you will. They're only for compliance that the code was met.
So T180 is evaluation. Acceptance criteria for NDE methods in this section shall be as stated in the referencing code section and where provided in the articles of this section. Acceptance criteria in the referencing code shall take precedence. So if we have something that indicates an acceptance criteria in section 5, the referencing code is really the one that applies. These are the acceptance criteria. As I've said several times, section 5 is the how-to, and the referencing codes, whether that is a contract, owner-elected exams, or engineering documents, or section 1 or B31.1 or B31.3, they tell you how good or how bad a weld is. We tell you what the characteristics are. So section 5 is the how-to, and codes are the how good or how bad, and where to apply the exams. If I click on the wrong thing, it doesn't function there. Records and documentation, T190. Documentation and records shall be prepared as specified by the referencing code, applicable requirements of this section. Examination records shall include the following information as a minimum. So these items have to be on every examination record. The date, the name, identity, certification level of the personnel performing the exam, identification of the weld part component, serial number, other identifier, examination method, technique, procedure identification, and revision of the procedure, and the results of the examination. It doesn't matter if you're doing radiography or acoustic emissions, these things have to be on your examination record in all cases. We pulled these out of a lot of the other articles because they are required across the board for everything. Personnel qualification procedure demonstrations performed in compliance with T150A or T150B shall be documented as specified by the referencing codes. When documentation requirements of personnel qualification procedure performance are being performed in compliance with T150A, T150B are not specified in the referencing code, the following information shall be recorded as a minimum. So even if you're not required to go to T150A or T150B, you still have to say how you qualified your procedure. Additional records and documentation requirements are contained in the articles for each method and mandatory appendices for the techniques for these articles. Retention of examination records and related documentation, i.e. radiographs or EG radiographs, review forms, ultrasonic scan files, shall be as specified by the referencing code section. Now, having worked across many industries, I remember having worked for Los Alamos National Labs doing radiography, and you package your film up and you had your really nice report and everything clean and neat, and you turned it over with a transmittal form. And then I went out and did a pipeline job in the desert in New Mexico, and I gave it to the pipeline crew chief that was in charge of the digs and the welds. And he looked at the report, he pulled it out, he took the film and threw it in the ditch, and they buried it with the weld. And it was kind of one of those days when you went, I worked so hard, and he threw my film in the ditch. All he cared about was the paper report. So retention of the actual radiographs is really a matter of the owner's rep, the owner's inspector, the referencing code that you are using for your particular examinations. So documentation, we still have to prepare it. We still have to do all the right things for all the required reasons, but retention of radiographs is really up to the referencing code and the owner or the owner's rep. Anything else on that, Wayne?
I was on mute. No, but very briefly, the inspector, I hate to go back to that, but the inspector is really an auditor. It come to mind that we talked yesterday, B31, B31.1 and B31.3, that the owners got the right to have an individual that will audit. It doesn't come out and say audit, I forgot the exact words. But that person is performing in an audit capacity. I have personally seen 4 or 5 times in the last 6 years where that by contract, the certificate holder agreed to in contract that the owner had the final acceptance, the final disposition, even though that governing document, that power piping document, said the fabricator, the manufacturer, or the erector had that responsibility. So you can only imagine the chaos that caused when the owner thought that his level 3 had the overriding responsibility. And the fabricator, the problems that created for him, unfortunately, that's a contractual requirement, and that superseded the code. You can't go less than the code, but you can go more than the code. And the certificate holder swore them down. That'd be the last time that they ever agreed to something like that, that was a eye opener for them, and it cost them a lot of money, where that the owner deemed wells to be repaired that really should not have been repaired, but he wanted perfect. And the code does not say that the well cannot contain flaws, but the flaws that the well contains must meet the acceptance criteria. All of the codes have an acceptance criteria for a reason. It's not a rejection criteria. It's an acceptance criteria. Go ahead.
Thank you. So that completes the main body of Article 1. Mandatory Appendix 1 is laid out as follows. The general terms, definitions for radiography, ultrasonic, penetrant, mag particle, eddy current, visual testing, leak testing, acoustic emissions, examination system qualifications, acoustic pulse reflectometry, and guided wave examinations are all broken out in those subparagraphs. Mandatory Appendix 2, we talked about earlier. It is for CR, DR, PAUT, TOFT, and FMC. It contains experience and training requirements, level 3 requirements, examinations, and training outlines for each of those methodologies and techniques. Mandatory Appendix 3 is the use of the 2016 edition of ASNT, SNT, TC1A. And the major change that we made was the use of the verb shall throughout the document to emphasize that it's a recommendation presented in Section 5 has modified many of these should statements to make them shall statements. And continued satisfactory technical performance shall not be utilized for recertification without a reexamination. And the mandatory Appendix 3 as published required you to have a reexamination as specified by your level 3 in your written practice. And that reexamination, we didn't really say what it needed to be. We said it needed to be at the discretion of the level 3, but that you could recertify with continued satisfactory performance provided there was a reexamination. And you would be amazed at how many technical inquiries we received when we published that document. As a consequence of that, we have gone through and completely rewritten and will publish a new mandatory Appendix 3 in July of next year. Mandatory Appendix 4 is the use of, we'll talk more about Mandatory Appendix 3 later. Mandatory Appendix 4 is the use of CP 189, qualification, certification, non-destructive examination. It is a standard. It's not a recommended practice. So there's a difference in how it's used. There's a lot fewer exceptions. Requirements identified in this mandatory appendix take exception to those specific requirements identified in the 2016 edition of CP 189. So we added some additional requirements, but not nearly as many as we did for TC 1A because of the difference between a standard and a recommended practice. Non-mandatory Appendix A. Wayne, would you like to talk about this? If you can find your mute button.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Again, we had the next 3 slides in one, but we separated it so we could see it. Different service-induced imperfections. And I want to point out to say this is service-induced. Again, the codes are for new construction, but a lot of standards and possibly other codes do reference Section 5 for methodology. To my knowledge, it's the only complete code out there that includes the depth of methodology, how to perform the NDE. So for example, AWS, American Welding Society, AWWA, American Water Works Association, many other standards do reference Section 5. So we made a list, and I'm not going to go through all of them. If you go down to the 3rd slide so they can see the bullet, the one with the dot in it, etc., the key, the next slide. That one, there you go.
4th slide.
The 4th slide, excuse me. And it shows at the bottom under VT visual, all or most standards techniques will detect this imperfection under all or most conditions. Up the top right, the single line with the slight dot in it, one or more standards technique will detect this imperfection or flaw under certain conditions. And then the one directly below that, special techniques, conditions, and or personnel qualifications are required to detect this. So let's go back up to the very first one again. Now we had the legend out of the way. You'll now have again, this is contained in the code, directly out of the code, but you can go across the top from surface, VT or PT, and you can see the different types of flaw service-induced imperfections that are identified on the next 3 pages. Subsurface, subsurface, near surface, mag particle and eddy current, and then volumetric contained within the volume, radiography, ultrasonic, angle beam, ultrasonic shear wave, AE acoustic emission, and UT thickness. This is what that we had found for the different types of flaws. And rather than go down and read them for the sake of time, we just wanted to point these out to you so that when you look at this later, you can see, okay, here's creep damage, and there's a note to creep. But you go right straight across the surface, you don't really see that much, but you're going what that you have there, and you got a special note that really indicates that. So we don't have anything identified on that one. But if you go back up to first one, abrasive wear, then you can see that VT and PT and MT and radiography and ultrasonics all the way across, that you have some degree of finding this abrasive wear. Cracks, fatigue cracks down, same thing, just all of them but two are indicated. The UT shear wave and the UT thickness especially, not going to find the very fine, tightly adherent fatigue cracks in particular, especially the thickness read, you won't find it. Let's go to the next slide. Again, burn through, this is a welding imperfection, different types of cracks. So we made the distinction between service-induced and welding imperfections. Again, the construction codes are for welding imperfections. That's where that they reference that particular NDE methodology. They'll go to radiography, happens to be Article 2 that we'll briefly discuss, ultrasonics, Article 4, penetrant, magnetic particle, whatever that NDE methodology is, they'll reference. And this is what they're concerned with. Incomplete penetration, lack of fusion, cracks. That's the three most unmentionable. Porosity, root concavity, undercut, things that nature. I'll notice that OD undercut associated with welding for the power piping indicates that at the toe of the weld, it is determined by mechanical means, the acceptance, not the just showing up on a radiograph, or not saying, okay, I can identify that off of a full V bounce with ultrasonics. But that says mechanical means for undercut. But you can see it visually, and yes, you can see it radiography. But the actual disposition of that, according to the power piping, unless they've changed it recently, but I've worked with it last edition, again, is to be disposition via mechanical means, which measures it. Next slide. It continues on, you got product form imperfections, burrs, co-shuts, cracks, hot tears, inclusions, laminations, laps, porosity, and seam. So you can see these three slides, we've got service induced, we've got weld, and then we've got product form imperfections or flaws. Last slide. This again, we briefly discussed the flaw mechanisms of which NDE method can best determine. And we have the legend to the left-hand side, the NDE methods of which are used in radiography. Please note that we do not reference neutron radiography, tomography to date, and other NDE methods, of which there are plenty out there. But these are the ones for the construction codes that are realized, that are recognized. General note, we had note 4, you got various NDE methods are capable of detecting tertiary third stage creep, and some, particularly using special techniques, are capable of detecting secondary second stage creep. There are various descriptions, definitions for the stages of creep, and a particular description, definition will not be applicable to all materials and product forms. So it's real important when you go through and reading tables to look at the notes and go back to what that note applied, where it was applied, how it was applied. You've got important, pertinent information there. I think that covers the 4 slides we had on this fairly quickly.
So that completes the review of Section 5, Article 1, which is the general requirement section.
You want to take radiography? You want me to?
I have a slide for each of the methods.
Okay, I'll take RT and we'll go briefly through that. Most all the methods it shows, Article 2 appear at the top. Under that, the scope 210 through 290, all of our articles are set up very similar. Many of them are exact. Wording, each one has a scope. For example, Article 2, the 2 denotes Article 2. If you talk ultrasonics, it'd be 410. If you talk visual, I think that's Article 9, that would be 910. So they're all, it's X10, X20, X90, and they're all set up the same way. Each article has mandatory and non-mandatory appendices. With this one, the mandatory appendix 1 in motion, and within the scope of the code, within the scope of that article, it will tell you in certain places where you can reference these. For example, I'm going to go down to mandatory appendix 8 is radiography using phosphor imaging plates. That's CR, computed radiography. Appendix 9 is radiography using digital detector systems. That is DR, digital radiography. Then we have a list of non-mandatory appendix. Any place that you find the mandatory appendix where an area is not listed, for example, exactly the same as 260 for calibration or 270 for examination up at the top. Words that's in that mandatory appendix are in addition to what's in that main article. In other words, that main article will contain valuable information that's needed in writing the procedure, and then the additional information is found into the mandatory appendix. You can go to the next slide. You've got some more non-mandatory. What? Okay. I thought we had more non-mandatory appendix listed, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The next one, that's Article 2. Then go ahead and jump back. Next slide. We don't have an Article 3. We used to have an Article 3, and now it's going to be used for something else, but it was for casting. So we included Article 2 and 3 in Article 2, previously talking radiography. So we jump up to Article 4, ultrasonic examination. You'll see this one is set up very similar to what the previous article, Article 2 for radiography, starts out with scope. And again, note, the previous one we discussed was 210. Why? Because it's Article 2. This one is 410 because it's Article 4. And the same nomenclature goes down through here with very few exceptions. You've got mandatory appendices that's used. You've got 1 through 11 I see on this page. With this one, we got FMC, full matrix capture. That mandatory appendix delineates what there is in addition to the main article that's needed for full matrix capture. We've got Article 7 and 8. You've got, especially 8, a lot of people in the nuclear industry, ultrasonics requirements for fracture mechanics based acceptance criteria. This is what you do when you're based on fracture mechanics and performing ultrasonics. One previous Article 7 is workmanship-based acceptance criteria. That's what you do in order to deem that the acceptance of that well based on workmanship or fracture mechanics. And one other that I overlooked was Appendix 8, time of flight diffraction, TOF technique. So again, in combination with the rest of that main article, you would use Article 3 for TOF, you'd use Article 7 for workmanship, Article 8 for fracture mechanics, etc. Next slide. These are the list of non-mandatory appendices. Not going to go into all of them, but basically what that means is this is here for, it's recommended. It's not mandatory, if you will. Valuable information can be garnered out of this. I just got through speaking of non-mandatory L, speaking of TOF, sizing demonstration, dual probe, computer imaging technique, valuable information there in case you need to do that. Same thing, Appendix N and Appendix O down here. We got TOF interpretation and technique, general examination configuration. Recently, in the last few years, we got Appendix P, phased array, PAUT interpretation. That's good to help the examiner out in this non-mandatory appendix. I'm going finally over that little quickly. You'll go to the next slide. Ultrasonic examination of materials. Unlike Article 2, where we included castings, other materials into 2. Ultrasonics felt that it was better to have a separate article for materials. Again, Article 4 is for welds. So please note again, it's 5, indicating Article 5, and it's set up the same way, very much similar. We have mandatory appendix listed here. Ultrasonic examination for pumps and valves, in-service examination of nozzle, inside corner radius, and inside corner regions. Go ahead. Liquid penetrant. Article 6, magnetic particle. Article 7, please note the noting of T610 belongs to Article 6 under the scope, and T710, scope for mag particle. Very much in line with the previous ones. You've got mandatory appendix 2 and 3 here under liquid penetrant, and the mag particle got mandatory appendix 1. This is using AC yoke technique on ferritic materials coated with non-ferromagnetic coatings.
Basically, that would be for painted.
Correct.
Painted surfaces.
Through painted surfaces. Correct. Go ahead. Eddy current.
Eddy current is kind of laid out different. Having been previously eddy current certified, I can tell you that eddy current is different. Eddy current is laid out where their scope document says, go to mandatory appendix 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, depending on what you're doing. And there are not very many general requirements in eddy current. There are very specific requirements for depending on what you're inspecting and how you're inspecting it, examining it, excuse me. After all these years, I still use inspection and examination wrong occasionally. 9 is visual, and it's laid out very simply. It doesn't have any mandatory appendices. Visual is getting some recent work. We're continuing to update visual technology. There's a lot of things going on in the code right now for remote visual and even for remote inspection in using cameras and heads-up displays and that sort of thing for inspectors to be able to see things in shops, and I'm talking authorized inspectors, owners inspectors, and such, so that they can have somebody with a camera on their head go look at something for them. The Technical Oversight Management Committee has a Strategic Initiatives Committee, which I chair, and they have a task group that's looking at remote inspection and examination technology. So we're constantly improving and trying to improve the applications within the ASME code. Article 10, leak testing. One of my certifications, and there's a lot to leak testing. The appendices are on the next slide. They cover all the different methodologies. So bubble testing, vacuum box, halogen diode, mass spectrometer, and a couple of methodologies, pressure change, thermal conductivity, hood technique, mass spec, ultrasonic leak detection, helium mass spectrometer, helium filled, another method of mass spectrometer, and then supplementary leak testing equation symbols. There's a lot of information involved in leak testing. And we've been doing a lot of work lately in improving and getting the leak testing standards back to where they need to be and catching up with our technology. Acoustic emissions. Article 11 is acoustic emissions examination of fiber reinforced plastic vessels. So it's a very specific article, much like we said, Article 4 is for welds, Article 5 is for materials, Article 11 is for acoustic emissions on fiber reinforced plastic vessels. Article 12 is acoustic emissions on metallic vessels during pressure testing. So you can put your acoustic emissions sensors on when you're doing your pressure testing and apply them in accordance with this article of Section 5. 13, continuous acoustic emissions of metallic vessels during pressure testing. Article 14 is examination system qualifications. We'll talk about Article 14 more later, but this is the way it's laid out: the scope, the general requirements, equipment, and such. Conduct of the qualification demonstration, calibration, examination, evaluation, and documentation. And then mandatory Appendix 2, ultrasonic UT performance demonstration criteria. And as I've said earlier, there's always more rules applied to ultrasonics, it seems. And I think that comes from early in our inception. Ultrasonics was applied inconsistently. The people that were trained and qualified in ultrasonics early on, a lot of times they hadn't been properly trained. They weren't properly experienced, and they were out there performing the exams, and they didn't know what they didn't know. And we've seen the same thing over the years with phased array when it first rolled out. We had people performing phased array that weren't fully trained and weren't really up to speed and knowledgeable in all of the things that they needed to be. So we've tried to improve ultrasonics and the acceptance of ultrasonics by increasing the demonstration criteria. Article 15, alternating current field measurement techniques, the ACFM. That one's fairly new. I don't recall when it came out. Do you recall when this was put in, Wayne?
Get my mute button off there. Mr. Burks was heavily responsible for this. This was just before 2010, 2007, 8, 9, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
When this was put in.
And we also had the magnetic flux leakage and
same thing, about the same
and the
time
APR.
Right, about the same time.
Yeah. The acoustic pulse reflectometry examination, I'm going to say that was around 2009, 10.
Right.
In there. Article 19 is guided wave examination method for piping. This is more recent. And we actually had a working group on guided wave when this was being developed. And now we have rolled those people back under the ultrasonics working group. So working group ultrasonics is now in charge of guided wave ultrasonics.
This is around 2015, just about 5-6 years ago.
Yeah. And that's the end of our currently published articles. It is interesting to note we have Article 20 and Article 21 that will be in the coming 2021 edition, and then I'll have a slide on them later. So now it gets back into more of the particulars. Article 14 is examination system qualification. And the provisions of this article are to be used when qualifying NDE systems, mandatory when specifically invoked by the referencing code section. It's interesting to note that B31Q says that you will qualify your procedures using Article 14. Also in Section 11, Appendix 8, their program references Article 14. In a lot of cases, when you get ready to qualify a procedure, you have to have technical justifications and you have to go through the levels of rigor that are required to get a particular procedure qualified to a particular level. Organization is responsible for qualifying examination technique, equipment, and written procedure in conformance with this article. Referencing code sections shall be consulted for the following specific detailed requirements: personnel certifications, examination planning, including the extent of the examination. We've always said that Section 5 is the how-to, but the referencing codes are the where and the how often and the how good. And in many cases, Section 5 doesn't say that you have to inspect the weld and the heat affected zone, or the weld and a ½ inch either side of the weld, or the weld and half T either side of the weld. That's the referencing code. And in many cases, they may say the weld. In many cases, they may say the weld and half T either side of the weld. But that's up to the referencing code or the customer specification or the particular requirements that point you to Section 5 and how they're going to do things. Now, any owner out there, any licensee, any person who is getting non-destructive examination performed for their engineering needs, they can specify the use of Article 14 to qualify the procedures. And what you get is a documentation package that says, this is how we did it, this is how we planned it, this is the area we're looking at, these are the types of flaws, so the acceptance criteria, the level of rigor, what is your level of confidence in your probability of detection. So those are important terminology, the level of confidence in what your probability of detection is. The examination sensitivity, the probability of detection, the sizing accuracy, the records that are to be done for qualification, and the retention of the records are all things that have to be specified by the referencing code or the referencing documents. The qualification process set forth in this article involves evaluation of general, technical, and performance-based evidence presented within documented technical justification, and when required, blind or non-blind performance demonstration. Technical justification is a written report providing detailed explanation of the written procedure, the underlying theory of the examination method, and any laboratory experiments or field examinations that support the capability of the examination methods. I did a procedure qualification for the mixed oxide waste project back in, it was probably about 2010. And we went out and selected field produced welds, developed a scanning process and everything that we needed to be able to inspect these, and found flaws in these field produced welds, and then did metallography and sectioned and determined what we had found. Was it accurate? Were our sizing methodologies accurate? And this was 4 millimeter thick 304 stainless that was being used to build the subject welds. And it was mathematically modeled with the SEVA program. And it was amazing when we sectioned these things that you would lay out the metallography section along with the theoretical, what it should look like, along with the ultrasonic exams, and the accuracy was amazing. And the previous exams had been performed with manual conventional 1/4 inch single element transducers, and we used phase array, dual element, 10 megahertz, specially developed and cut wedges for this particular thing. And the technical justification was quite a document, but it was being produced for use on radioactive materials in some fairly sensitive things. So we used Article 14 for that. It wasn't invoked by the code, but it was invoked by the owner. General requirements, performance demonstration establishes the ability of a specific examination system to achieve satisfactory probability of detection. Currently, Article 14 is going through a major revision. The analytics are being looked at to expand the level of confidence and the probability of detection numbers, because currently it's only 90% probability of detection with a 90% level of confidence, a 95%, and a 99.9. So we really only have 3 levels of each of those. And currently there's 3 levels of rigor involved in Article 14. We want to expand that as well. And so there's a major rewrite going on for Article 14 right now. Levels of rigor: more rigorous procedure qualification can be beneficial for the following reasons. You have an improved pass-fail rate. A more robust procedure is easier for personnel to apply and get the right results. You have reduced scope of blind personnel qualifications, better understanding of correlation between the procedure and the damage mechanisms of interest, and more reliable written procedures. The levels of rigor: qualifications performed at one of 3 levels of rigor. The referencing code invokes the required level of rigor, or the engineering documents, or the customer specification, or whatever is your controlling document. The 3 levels of rigor are low rigor, which you just provide a technical justification, a document saying why this is an acceptable performance of the examination, that it's capable of doing what needs to be done. Intermediate rigor, which is what the Section 11 Appendix 8 points to, is you have a technical justification, but you also perform blind inspections or non-blind examinations of test specimens and determine that you are within some level of probability of detection and false calls. And then high rigor, which is the full performance demonstration, it would include a technical justification and more inspections and examinations to make sure that you can find the types of flaws in the areas of the for probability detection and for false call rates. We'll look at that more in just a moment. So examination, performance demonstration shall be conducted in accordance with written procedure using the techniques and equipment described in the tech justification. Supplemental information for conducting various modes of performance demonstrations provided in the following paragraphs. Intermediate rigor: the objective of intermediate rigor performance demonstration is to reveal inadequate procedures or examiners. So this is the go or no go type. You write the procedure, you write the justification, you go out and perform exams, and you pass or you fail. The high rigor: following guidelines describe methodology for constructing POD performance demonstration tests for examination system qualification. In order to construct any of the detection tests mentioned in the appendix, the following information must be assembled: the type of materials, type of flaws the procedure is supposed to detect, the size of the critical flaw for this application, minimum acceptable probability of detection, critical flaws, the maximum acceptable false calls probability, and the level of confidence that the test is supposed to provide. So table T 1472.1 has level of confidence, the number of missed flaws, the probability of detection. It doesn't have the false call information, that's a separate function. But if you want a 90% level of confidence with a 90% probability of detection, then you can have 0 missed flaws, and you have to have at least 22 flaws in your sample set. If you want to miss flaws, or you want to allow the examiners to miss a flaw or 2 or 3, then you have to have a lot more specimens, flawed samples in your sample set. And as you can see, if you wanted a 99% probability of detection and a 99% level of confidence, and you wanted to allow them to miss 3 flaws, you have to have more than 1,000 flaws in your sample set. That's a very extensive qualification. Even if you get 99% level of confidence, 99 probability of detection, you're talking about a sample set that has 458 flaws. One of the things that we found in applying Section 11, Appendix 8, was that the regulatory bodies were willing to allow us an 80% confidence in finding 80% of the flaws, because you had those few flaws that were allowable, but you could miss them. We've never had the numbers, the analytics, to be able to do an 80% level of confidence in finding 80% of the flaws, probability of detection. And one of our major rewrites is to expand this, and our expansion is going to be allowing 50% confidence in finding 50% of the flaws, and then the numbers all the way up to this current 99.99. So we would have 50, 55, 60, 65, all the way through. It's quite an endeavor. The NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology, is working with us, developing the analytics on this. It probably will not make the we know it won't make the 2021 edition. It probably will not make the 2023 edition, but we do expect the 2025 edition to have this fully expanded level of confidence and probability of detection. So Wayne, if you want to take over the follow the code rules section.
Okay, thanks, Ned.
Wayne, I'm sorry. May I suggest another 10 minutes break for another mug of coffee?
That sounds
All
good.
right.
That sounds good. We'll have 10-minute break and then resume on this slide.
Okay, people. 11:40. We have 10 minutes break. 11:40. Everybody back, and you can take the time and write your questions to our presenters.
You see before you, can you hear me okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. The
We
slide.
do have another, the 3.5 hour, because we do want to leave time for.
How much time do we have left, total time?
We will go up to 12:30.
Okay, 12:30.
Okay,
Yes.
so that's what, 40 minutes left?
It's yes, that's right.
Okay, well, and that's including.
It's 50 minutes left.
Okay, 50 minutes left, including questions, correct?
No. And besides that, we will have half an hour of questions.
Okay.
So we've got 50 minutes plus a half hour questions.
Correct. Very good.
Right.
All right.
Just
Thank
wanted
you.
to make sure we finished on time and had plenty of time for questions.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
Moving right along. Follow the code ASME B31.1. We got the examination out of 136.3 in the general. Examination denotes the functions performed by the manufacturer, fabricator, or erector, or the party authorized by the owner that includes, to include the non-destructive examination, such as, and I mentioned them here, visual, radiography, ultrasonics, etc. The degree of examination acceptance standards beyond the requirements of the code, this code, shall be a matter of agreement, prior agreement between the manufacturer, fabricator, or erector and the owner. I briefly spoke of this earlier, that I've seen several cases in this country where the certificate holder, the fabricator, was unaware of what the contract said. The contract indicated that the owner had final disposition responsibilities. You need to watch that. The contract, that's a legal situation that have to be worked out by the courts, and that has presented a lot of heartache and headache with manufacturers in this country. Next slide. Okay, qualification of NDE personnel. Personnel perform the NDE of wells shall be qualified and certified for each examination method in accordance with the program established by the employer of the personnel that's being certified, which shall be based on the following minimum requirements: instructions and fundamental of the non-destructive examination method, on-the-job training to familiarize the NDE personnel with the appearance and interpretation of indication of weld defects. The length of time for such training shall be sufficient to ensure adequate assimilation of the knowledge required. A visual acuity examination performed at least once each year to determine the optical capability of the NDE personnel to perform the required examination. This is a real important, real key. Upon completion of A and B, Alpha and Bravo above, the NDE personnel shall be given a written examination and performance examination by the employer to determine if the NDE personnel are qualified to perform the required examination and interpretation of the examination results. As a certificate holder, if you're a manufacturer and you have in-house people, well, you're controlling everything. If you're a certificate holder and you contract outside NDE personnel, then it's your responsibility from an audit standpoint to make sure that their written program, that they conform with everything that we just discussed here. Next slide.
Wayne, I wanted to make a point here. This does not say that only level 1 and level 2 personnel have to be given written examination and performance examinations. It says E personnel. So that would include your level 3s. They have to be given a performance examination. And I think that's an important point that we brought out in our mandatory appendix 3.
Correct. Good point. Next slide, 136.3.2, qualification NDE personnel. Echo, certified NDE personnel whose work has not included performance of a specific examination method for a period of 1 year or more shall be recertified by successfully completing the examination of D, Delta, and also passing a visual examination of C, Charlie. Substantial changes in procedures or equipment shall require recertification of the NDE personnel. In our articles, we have what's considered essential variables and non-essential variables. If you have a change in the essential variables of that particular method, then that's also going to require re-qualification, recertification. It says for this code, the requirements of ASME, BPVC, Section 5, Article 1, Mandatory Appendix 3, or optional. And the B31, I think, is the only, well, the B31s are the only one that says it's optional. From the other codes, this is mandated, the best of my knowledge. Again, I would, in question, I would check that code that you're working to see.
This is from the 2020 edition of B31.1.
Right, okay. As an alternative to the preceding program, the requirements of Section 5, Article 1, T120 Echo or Foxtrot F may be used for the qualification NDE personnel. And I think Foxtrot is talking about the ISO 9712. Personnel qualified AWS QC1 may be used for the visual examination of wells provided they meet the annual visual acuity examination requirement of C, Charlie, and the Jaeger 1, J1 visual acuity requirement of BPVC Section 5, Article 9. Okay. Next slide.
Switched already.
All righty. Examination for 136.4.6 ultrasonics. When required by this chapter, and it gives you a table, 136.4.1-1, ultrasonic examinations shall be performed in accordance with the requirement of Section 5, Article 4. In addition, requirements below. So you got the additional requirements that they say, and you've got to pay particular attention to all codes, because all codes will have extra provisions, if you will. They will say, okay, let's go to section 5, article whatever, but then you got extra information. Alpha says the following criteria shall be met when performing ultrasonic examinations. The equipment used to perform the examination shall be capable of recording the UT data, an encoder in essence, to facilitate the analysis by a third party and for the repeatability of subsequent examinations should they be required. Where physical obstructions prevents the use of systems capable of recording the UT data, manual UT may be used with the approval of the owner. So if you find a hanger or support or something in place and it cannot be 100% examination of that weld with that encoder can be accomplished, then you should have found out beforehand and talk with the owner and say, hey, we can only get 90%, 75% of this weld because we have an obstruction, but the rest of it we can do with manual, hence we won't be using the recorder. 2, NDE personnel performing an evaluated UT examination shall be qualified and certified in accordance with their employer's written practice and the requirements of paragraph 136.3.2 of this code. Ned just highlight a couple of things that's a key here. Personnel, procedures, and equipment used to collect and analyze UT data shall, not should, shall, it's mandatory, have demonstrated their ability to perform an acceptable examination using test blocks approved by the owner. Next slide, 136.4.1, non-destructive examination. The NDE shall be performed in accordance with the requirements of this chapter. The types and extent of mandatory examination for pressure wells and wells to pressure retaining components are specified in another table, table 136.4.1-1. For wells other than those covered under table, as previously mentioned, 136.4.1-1, only visual examination is required. Wells requiring non-destructive examination shall comply with the applicable acceptance standards for indications as specified in a couple of paragraphs, 136.4.2 and 136.4.6. As a guide, the detection capabilities for the examination methods are shown in another table. That's 136.4.1-2. Wells not requiring examination, i.e. RT, UT, MT, and PT by this code, or the engineering design shall be judged acceptable if they meet the examination requirements of 136.2 and the pressure test requirements specified in paragraph 137. NDE for P numbers, and it lists different P numbers here, P3, 4, 5A, 5B, and 15E. Material wells shall be performed after post-well heat treatment unless directed otherwise by engineering design. And this is a good example where they're saying when the NDE is to be performed. Required NDE for wells in all other materials may be performed before or after post-well heat treatment. Again, information of this nature is found within the construction code. Table 136.4.1-1, mandatory minimum non-destructive examinations for pressure wells or wells to pressure retaining components when volumetric examination is required. I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can see a good example where that you've got butt wells, which is a girth and longitudinal. You got a note down here and it gives you the thickness, what it's defined as, and it's got a temperature range over 750 degrees F or 450 C, and at all pressures, volumetric exam for over MPS 2, requirement, and you got MT or PT for MPS2 and less note 1 below. So you got RT may be used as an alternate to PT or UT when it's performed in accordance with this paragraph 1. And again, there's a difference between paragraph and table. In accordance with paragraph 136.4.5. And of course, the same thing goes with different temperature range to the right. Next slide. General notes under 136.4.1-1. All wells shall be given a visual examination in addition to the type of specific non-destructive examination specified. Bravo, MPS, nominal pipe size, DN, the diameter nominal diameter, RT, and it gives you definitions here, radiography, and the other NDE methods. I'm not going to read through them all. Delta, D, for non-destructive examinations of the pressure retaining component, refer to the standards listed in Table 126.1-1 or manufacturing specifications. E, Echo. Acceptance standards for non-destructive examinations performed are as follows. And it lists them. Made particles, see a certain paragraph. It's 136.4.3, etc. In volumetric, radiography, and ultrasonics, you can see radiography is 136.4.5 and ultrasonics is one more paragraph, 136.4.6. F, Foxtrot. All longitudinal wells and spiral wells and pipe intended for sustained operation in the creep range. See paragraphs 104.1.1 and 123.4 and table 102.4.7-1. Must receive and pass 100% volumetric examination. And they're again indicating RT or UT per the applicable material specification or in accordance with paragraph 136.4.5 or 136.4.6, which happens to be the RT or the UT acceptance criteria. Examination personnel. All personnel, 344.1, personnel qualification certification. Personnel performing non-destructive examination to the requirements of this code shall be qualified and certified for the method to be utilized following a procedure as described in ASME BPVC Section 5, Article 1, T120 Echo or Foxtrot. 342.2, specific requirement. For in-process examination, the examination shall be performed by personnel other than those performing the production work. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. If you've got a welder welding and he's also RT certified, he can't weld by day and do radiography at night. 343, examination procedures. Any examination shall be performed in accordance with a written procedure that conforms to one of the following methods specified in paragraph 344, including special methods. Reference to paragraph 344.1.2. Procedure shall be written as required in, again, we go back to Article 1. That's one of the reasons we spent so much time on Article 1 this morning. It contains valuable information. And I don't know if we've mentioned already or not, but each of the articles, Article 2, Article 3, etc., say when this article is turned on together with this article, you get Article 1. So you can read that in the scope of each of the articles. 343, examination procedures. Any examination shall be performed in accordance with a written procedure that conforms to one of the methods specified in paragraph 344. Again, includes special methods. Procedures shall be written as required. Again, Section 5, Article 1, T150. The employer shall make the examination procedures employed available to the inspector. Again, if this is the owner's inspector, then he's reviewing the procedures. B31 does not have an AI like the other BPV codes do. So that guy is doing an audit performance, if you will, and the procedure must be made available to them. Types of examinations, 344 and 344.1 general, and then point 1 methods. Except as provided in 344.1.2, any examination required by this code, by the engineering design, or by the inspector shall be performed in accordance with one of the methods specified herein. 344.1.2 special methods. If a method not specified herein is to be used, it and its acceptance criteria shall be specified in the engineering design in enough detail to permit qualification of the necessary procedures and examiners. In other words, the people that's going to be using that procedure. In accordance with 344.1.3, 100% examination, random examination, spot examination, or random spot examination is addressed. Next slide.
This will be for section 1.
Correct. Going back to section 1, P150, this is the prelude into the acceptance criteria for the NDE methods. But under PW, that stands for parts welding, 50.1, the manufacturer shall be responsible for assuring that non-destructive examination personnel have been qualified and certified in accordance with their employer's written practice prior to performing or evaluating radiographic or ultrasonic examination required by this section. SNT TC1A or CP189 shall be used as a guide for employers to establish their written practice. Let me stop here. Again, if a manufacturer is contracting the work out, then it's still your responsibility, the manufacturer's responsibility, to make sure that they have been qualified and certified in accordance with their employer's written practice. So you need to be aware of that written practice before you hire the NDE personnel, and you need to look at the package of each NDE person that's doing that work, and in essence, approve it that it meets your written practice and it meets the code. Next paragraph. If the techniques of computed radiography, CR, digital radiography, DR, phased array examination or testing, they use testing here, PAUT, or ultrasonic time of flight diffraction, TOF, are used, the training, experience, and examination requirements of Section 5, Article 1, Mandatory Appendix 2 shall also be included in the employer's written practice for each examination technique. We covered that a little earlier as to why. National and international certification programs may be used to fulfill the examination and demonstration requirements of the employer's written practice. Provisions for training, experience, qualification, and certification of NDE personnel shall be described in the manufacturer's quality control system, CPG of Section 1, paragraph 105.4. Next slide. PW 50.2, NDE personnel should be qualified by examination. Qualification of NDE Level 3 personnel certified prior to the 2004 edition of Section 1 may be based on demonstrated ability, achievement, education, and experience. Such qualifications shall be specifically addressed in the written practice. If the NDE Level 3 personnel are certified in either RT or UT methods and uses the techniques of computed radiography, CR or DR, or PAUT or TOF, then prior to their next recertification period, the requirement of Section 5, Article 2, Mandatory Appendix 2 for the Level 3 personnel shall be met. In essence, what that says is that it's now come out in the code, and if you're working to an earlier, if they were certified to an earlier edition, trained, qualified, and certified to earlier edition, upon expiration, then they must meet Article 1, Mandatory Appendix 2. When NDE personnel have been certified in accordance with the written practice based on addition of TC1A or CP189 earlier than that referenced at A320, their certification shall be valid until their next scheduled recertification. And A320 references the 2006 edition. So that means that you're now working to a later code. You do not have to stop that individual that's in the middle of a 3 or 5 year certification, 3 for level 2 and 5 years for level 3, and now recertify him. You can wait until their expiration comes up and then certify them in addition to the previous information, but they've got to be included under Section 5, Article 1, Mandatory Appendix 2. PW 50.3, recertification shall be in accordance with the employer's written practice based on the addition of TC1A or CP189 as referenced in A360. Recertification may be based on evidence of continued satisfactory performance or by re-examination or examinations indicating one or more as deemed necessary by the employer. In addition, if the techniques of CR or DR or PAUT or TOFT are used, the training, experience, and examination requirements in Section 5, Article 1, Mandatory Appendix 2 shall be met by the NDE personnel prior to recertification. Okay, again, we're in Section 1. PW 11 of Section 1, the first paragraph states, welded butt joints requiring volumetric examination are specified in Table PW 11. Now, let me say here, probably 20 years, up until about 20 years ago, it used to require radiography, but then they combined it and said volumetric, which means either or. And I'll come back a little discussion about that and MT and PT as surface exams in a second. Unless PW 11 restricts volumetric examination to one method, either the radiographic or the ultrasonic method may be used. You can do either one of them if it's required a volumetric exam. Acceptance of the well shall be determined by the method selected for the initial examination of the completed weld. So in other words, you do radiography on it, you don't like results, you can't back and go do ultrasonics on it. And you use the acceptance criteria of that method that was used. If repairs are required, the repairs shall be examined using the same method by which the unacceptable imperfections were detected. Again, if radiography was used to deem that welding flaw unacceptable, therefore rejectable, and a repair was made, then you come back and use the same method, radiography. Subsequent examinations of the weld following acceptance is beyond the requirements of this section and shall be a matter of agreement between the manufacturer and the user. That's the first paragraph. The next slide is the second paragraph. This was added almost 30 years ago. I think it was 1991 or 1992. Second paragraph states, experience has demonstrated that welded butt joints not requiring volumetric examination by these rules have given safe and reliable service, even if they contain imperfections that may be disclosed upon further examination. Any examination and acceptance standards beyond the requirements of this section are beyond the scope of the code and shall be a matter of agreement between the manufacturer and user. Well, what are they saying? They're saying that, for example, a 1,000 megawatt steam plant, fossil plant, probably contains a neighborhood of less than 50 wells that require a volumetric examination. If you look on the left-hand side, note 2, circumferential wells, MPS 10 inches or 1.1 inches, and that's for drums and shells. And the last one, you got circumferential wells and pipes, tubes, and headers. If you look at a steam power plant, fossil plant, you've got all the water wall tubes, you've got reheat, superheat tubes, you're going to have economizer tubes, on and on, that fall under this. They're not required to be examined. So what do you do if you want to use an NDE method, ultrasonics, or radiography as a quality control tool? In my humble opinion, it would be inadvisable to apply the code criteria. As a matter of fact, in many of them, you can't meet Section 5, the method, because if you have tangent tubes, you cannot examine 100% of that tube. You can, if you perform radiography and make an exposure, you cannot achieve 100% of that unless you do it tube by tube when it's jacked out, wedged out, when it's welded. So you need to talk with the engineer. The engineer and the NDE people come together on what exams need to be performed and any adjusted acceptance criteria. Next slide. General notes. This one's real important, and this is under the table. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll turn your attention to Charlie and Delta, radiography and ultrasonics. It gives the specific acceptance criteria. So again, where for the NDE that's being performed, volumetric NDE, where is it located? It's located in that construction code. PW parts welding 51 for radiography and PW 52 for ultrasonics. The next one is very important. Every one of them are important, by the way, but I just highlighted a couple of them here. Echo, personnel performing the volumetric examination required by this table shall be qualified and certified in accordance with PW 50 that we previously discussed. It says, when any combination of radiographic parameters produce a geometric unsharpness exceeding 0.07, then UT shall be used. This is an exception. Again, the code does make exception to the methodology that we use. Where the thickness is below 1/2 an inch, then radiography shall be used. H, both RT and UT examination are required for welds and ferritic materials using the electroslag welding process. If a grain refining austenization heat treatment is used, the UT examination shall be performed after the heat treatment is completed. Again, telling you when. And it goes on for the next one, says UT examination shall be done after an intermediate post-weld heat treatment or the final post-weld heat weld heat treatment is completed for alternating heat treatment when it's not used. So again, the construction code says when it's supposed to be done. Continuation on the general notes. I don't want to take a whole lot of time and read all of these, but again, a couple of important ones is both RT and UT examinations are required for welds in any material using the inertia or continuous dry friction welding process. And it talks about electric boilers in J. And K for fire tube boilers, volumetric examination is not required. And it gives you some instances here. Well, if it's not required, it's clear that it's not required, either in the table or in the general notes, but you decide to do it, how are you going to do it? And to what acceptance criteria? Again, that needs to be worked out between the certificate holder and the owner, the manufacturer and the user. I completed with that one. Section 3, NCA 4252 personnel, 52.1, indoctrination training. And this is nuclear, by the way. Section 3 is nuclear new construction. So I've given an example of fossil for Section 1. Section 8 pressure vessels are very similar. Now I want to talk nuclear construction. Indoctrination, training, and qualification of personnel. Alpha. Measures shall be established to assure that all personnel performing or managing activities affecting quality are indoctrinated and trained. B, Bravo. All non-destructive examination personnel shall be qualified in accordance with. In these paragraphs, NB is Class 1 material, NB, NC, ND, NE, NF, NG, -5521, and the 5000 series is under the title examination of the applicable subsection. And again, subsection is NB for NC for Class 1, Class 2, Class 3 materials, etc. So that information is contained in 5,000. NCA 4252.1, indoctrination again, measurements. I've already read that one. 4253, program documentation. Quality control system. Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. Alpha, the quality system program shall be described and summarized in a quality system manual that shall be a major basis for demonstration of compliance with the rules of this section. Bravo, the program documented in the manual shall be implemented by written procedures that are maintained either separately or in the quality system manual. Charlie, detailed technical procedures and processes that Ned just highlighted, such as those for non-destructive examination, are not considered part of the manual. However, the controls of such procedures and processes shall be covered by the manual. In other words, the manual shall address them. Next slide. Program demonstration. Activities affecting quality shall be prescribed by and performed in accordance with documented instructions and procedures or drawings of a type appropriate to the circumstances. These documents shall include or reference appropriate acceptance criteria for determining that the prescribed activities have been satisfactorily completed. The process control under 4257. Processes affecting quality of materials, source of materials, or services shall be controlled. Special processes that control or verify quality, such as those used in welding, heat treating, or NDE, non-destructive examination, shall be performed by qualified personnel using qualified procedures in accordance with specific requirements. Duties of the inspector. Again, this is not who's doing the examination, this is the inspector. The inspector who performs the detailed inspection in compliance with this section shall witness or otherwise verify all examinations and make all inspections required by this section. The duties of the inspector shall not be interpreted by virtue of these rules to extend to any construction requirements beyond those of this section that may be set forth in the design specifications of NCA 3251 or on design drawings and construction specifications of NCA 3340. However, such requirements shall not result in construction that fails to conform with the requirements of this section. NCA 5220, categories of inspector duties. The duties of the inspector shall include, but not necessarily be limited to, those given in A through M below, with E, echo, witnessing or verifying in-process fabrication, non-destructive examinations, and test. That's NCA 5270. That's the duties of the inspector. Go ahead. Examination procedure. The inspector shall assure himself or herself that the examinations and testing procedures required by this section have been qualified. When there is a specific reason to question where the examinations or testing procedure requirements are being met, the inspector may require re-qualification of the procedure. It's his right. It's his responsibility. NCA 5256, non-destructive examination personnel. The inspector has the duty to verify the qualification, certification, and non-destructive examination personnel employed by the certificate holder and has the duty to monitor the non-destructive examination activities and require requalification of any personnel when there is reason to question the performance of that person. In addition, the inspector shall monitor the certificate holder's quality assurance program as it relates to non-destructive examination activities of material organizations and NDE subcontractors that I spoke about briefly earlier that the certificate holder qualified. Again, it's certificate holder's responsibility. Continuing duties of the inspector, 5270, the inspector shall witness in process fabrication, non-destructive examination, and destructive test when feasible. Alternatively, he or she shall check the examination and test records to determine the acceptability of the items involved. They do not have to make the determination. They just make sure that everything was accepted. NCA 7100-2, standard specification referenced in Division 1-3, referenced in Division 2, Section 3, Div 1 and Div 2. And then the other one, American Society, non-destructive testing, AS&T, is TC1A, personnel qualification certification for non-destructive testing. And I missed on the other line above it. Section 3 references 2006 and 2011 of TC1A. Different methods. Continuing on 5111, again, all this is out of the main title. Think of that as NX 5000. That's NB, NC, ND, etc. NB 5000 examination under 5111 methods. Non-destructive examination shall be conducted in accordance with the examination methods of Section 5, except they may be modified by the requirements of this article. Under fabrication, radiographic examination shall be performed in accordance with Section 5, Article 2, except that fluorescent screens are not permitted for film radiography. Can use fluorescent screens. The geometric unsharpness shall not exceed the limits of Article 2, Paragraph T 274.2 and the image quality indicators of Table NB 5111-1 shall be used in lieu of those in Section 5, Table T276. Well, why'd they say that? Because our table is used by many, many different codes. And while that we do not proclaim to achieve 2-2T sensitivity, neither does Table 5111-1. However, it is a little tighter on some of the different thickness ranges concerning radiographic sensitivity. The requirements for the retention of electronic and digital radiographic images are the same as that for film, analog. Ultrasonic examination shall be in accordance with Section 5, Article 4, and it goes on. Mag particle, liquid penetrant, leak testing. I think that was it. The rest of them that's mentioned in that paragraph. Pre-service, ultrasonic examination required for well pre-service examination shall be in accordance with Section 11, Mandatory Appendix 1. Eddy current examination, again, Section 5, Article 8. Charlie, the examination required by this article or reference to this article shall be performed by personnel who have been qualified as required by this article. And later on, it tells you how they're to be qualified within 5,000. The results of the examination shall be evaluated in accordance with acceptance standards. Where? Of this article. The acceptance standards for nuclear new construction are contained in NX 5000, not in Section 5, not in Section 11 for welding. It's contained within that construction code. Continuing for Section 3, 5112, all non-destructive examinations required by this article shall be performed in accordance with detailed written procedures which have been proven by actual demonstration to the satisfaction of the inspector. Key point, every procedure. In many of the steam generator replacements I've been involved in, these procedures were demonstrated and qualified well before we got into the outage of tearing out the old steam generators and putting in the new. We shot mock-ups for everything, and they had been previously demonstrated to the satisfaction of the inspector. So when it came up to actual production, manufacturing, erecting, if you will, then everything had been done. If we deviated from that procedure, majority of the time, the inspector said, I need to see a redemonstration. The procedures shall comply with the appropriate article of Section 5, for the particular examination method. Again, the construction code is referenced in Section 5. The digitization of radiographic film and radioscopic images shall meet the requirements Section 5, Article 2, Mandatory Appendix 3, digital image acquisition, display, and storage for radiographic and radioscopy. Written procedures and records of demonstration for procedure capability and personnel qualifications shall be made available to the inspector on request. At least one copy of the procedure shall be readily available to all applicable non-destructive examination personnel for reference and use. Next slide. Examination general requirements. Organization performing code required NDE shall use personnel competent and knowledgeable to the degree specified in MB 5520. When these services are subcontracted by the certificate holder or quality system certificate holder, he or she shall verify the qualification of personnel to the requirements of NB 5520. All non-destructive examinations required by this subsection shall be performed by and the results evaluated by qualified non-destructive examination personnel. 5121, qualification procedure, alpha. Personnel performing non-destructive examinations shall be qualified in accordance with the recommended guidelines of S&T TC1A or ACCP Level 2 and Level 3 provisions for qualification certification and the AS&T administered Level 2 certification provisions for qualification certification of NDE personnel shall not be used for Section 3. The employer's written practice required by paragraph 5 of S&T TC1A shall identify the requirements relative to the recommended guidelines. The recommended guidelines of TC1A shall be considered as minimum requirements except as modified 1 through 5 below. And I'm going to jump down to those. It says midway down, recommended guidelines TC1A considered minimum except as modified. And the last paragraph says 1 through 5 are the exceptions taken by Section 3. Level 3 shall be qualified by examination. The written practice shall be referenced in the quality manual or quality program. Training hours for limited qualifications may be reduced. Eye examination shall be Jaeger J-1 and responsibilities of level 1 with requirement of supervision by level 2 or level 3. So they're saying, hey, level 1 can't get out there and work unsupervised. You can reduce the hours that's for limited qualification. The written practice shall be referenced in the quality manual, and the level 3s shall be qualified by examination. Go ahead. The employer retains responsibility for adequacy of the program and is responsible for certification of level 1, level 2, and level 3 NDEP. Bravos when AS&T is the outside agency administering level 3 basic and method examinations. The employer may use a letter from AS&T as evidence on which to base certification. When an outside agency is the examining agent for the level 3 qualification of the employer's personnel, the examination result shall be included with the employer's record. Let me stop here. AS&T for level 3 gives you a 2-part of a 3-part examination. It's a written exam for all the NDE methods that they offer. AS&T at present doesn't give a performance exam, a practical exam. Again, that's up to the employer to satisfy. But if someone has an AS&T certificate, for example, in radiography, and you want to hire them to review the radiographs, then it's your responsibility to complete the process and give them a practical that's pertinent to the type of work that you're doing. Just because they have an AS&T level 3 doesn't mean that they're qualified to review radiographs. And the same thing for ultrasonics, if you will. 5523, back up a second. Verification on destructive examination personnel. Again, the certificate holder has responsibility to verify the qualification and the certification. The certification, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing more than the stroke of the pen, the piece of paper that says someone's qualified. Of the non-destructive examination personnel employed by material organizations and qualified by them in accordance NCA 3820 and subcontractors who provide NDE services to them. So it still is the certificate holder's responsibility. New records for Section 5 in 2021. You want
to take over here, Wayne?
Go ahead. All yours.
So this is a list of the new records other than the ASTM approvals or RADA approvals and some of that kind of things that we did. But just to hit the highlights, record 15-1862 is the addition in Article 4 and Article 5 for rules for transfer correction due to surface finish, heat treat, or other conditions. That's a fairly significant effort. It started in 2015 and it was completed this year. So it's been approved. It will show up in the 2021 edition. Article 4, review of mandatory Appendix 9. That was some more work we've done. You can see these as they come out. Article 2, radiography, review of bad pixel, clarification requirements for IQI blocks. We clarified a figure in Article 4. We added the new Article 20, which is development of rules for computed tomography. Article 1, we moved some definitions around. Mandatory Appendix 9 for Article 2. Article 4, Mandatory Appendix 11, corrected some paragraphs for FMC. Article 2, we also worked on T224. Article 10, which is leak testing, mandatory appendix. We've done a lot of work in Article 10. Some of it's still pending. Not all of it's gotten done. Article 2, mandatory appendix 8 and 9, requirements for pixel intensity, image brightness, as well as we looked at, revised the paragraph to talk about pixel averaging for that. That was a fairly significant one for us here at Duke Energy. Article 1, mandatory appendix 3, we corrected some errors in it. As y'all know, it caused quite a stir because it did have some errors in it. Mandatory appendix 9, article 4, mandatory appendix 3, we did a bunch of work in mandatory appendix 3.
But before you go on, go back to the other slide, computed tomography. This was necessitated by the advent of the code looking at additive manufacturing. This is one of the NDE methods that can be used for that. And I lost my train of thought. The computer generated components.
Yeah, digitally printed or laser welded and all of that, where they build things by advanced manufacturing.
Correct. That was it.
Continuing on, we also added new Article 21, which is the pulse eddy current examination. It's used primarily for, we'll talk about it in a minute. It's used primarily for some new applications. Article 1, mandatory appendix 3, we had a complete rewrite. It's been approved, so it'll come out as well. We also plan to have a code case on it so that it can be used early. And then Article 1, mandatory appendix 1, Article 4, mandatory appendix, we did some more work there in the FMC. The transfer correction, we've done both straight beam as well as correction for angle beam so that you can use your cow blocks that are a different heat treat, a different surface finish, a different thickness, you know, those sort of things. Quite an effort here, and we were glad to get it approved, and we'll get it published in the 2021 edition. Mandatory Appendix 3, Article 1, the use of S&T TC1A 2016. We've been through a lot on it. There were errors identified in publishing. There were some typographical errors. There were some references that were not correct that we fixed. A lot of work has gone into that. Pulse eddy current is used primarily for examination of components for corrosion and or erosion mapping. It's going to come out, new rules for use of it. And that would complete our presentation. I guess we're into questions, Antonio.
Yes, and just in the perfect time. So sharp. I have a lot of questions here, and let me begin for the first one. Why do some ASME authorized inspectors in Brazil not accept ISO 9712 certification?
So 9712, the 2012 edition, has been accepted for certain things, and we talked about that in the early beginnings there.
Okay.
I was
next
going to
one.
see if I can get to that slide.
Yeah, while he's trying to pull that slide up, I'll chime in. Right now, we've got, I'm not going to call it a dilemma, but I understand what the ASME survey team leaders are going through and trying to look at the many different NDE programs out there. You got SNT TC1A, many different editions that many different codes use. We've got a spreadsheet. If we have time, we'll bring that up to show you, for example, each section of the code. They have referenced anywhere from 1992 edition to the 2016 edition, and there's been changes made along the way. You got ACCP, CP 189, ISO 9712, and it says other national or international certification. Unfortunately, when they're sitting down and reviewing, what they're looking at is what the code presently says. When someone is a certificate holder and they come under ASME survey, then let's just take section 1, for example. I talked about that earlier. Then they have the certificate holders presented with that book and the support books that they need, i.e. section 2 for materials, section 5 NDE, section 9 for welding. And they may be doing work overseas. One thing we haven't mentioned, we do have an IWG in Italy that's formed about 2.5 years ago. And around Milan, Italy, there's about 250 plus different ASME certificate holders, various codes. And the ASME survey team members can only reference what that construction code points them to. And if they have an addition, as you can see, the difference between section 3 and section 1, that they have exceptions to what section 5 has. Now, they look at the section 5 requirements and the TC1A, and they may get down into the really detailed information. And I'm just pulling an example out where the TC1A will say a minimum number of hours. Well, ASME survey looks at that and they should is suddenly changed to a shall. So you've got to have 80 hours as a level 2, level 40 hours, level 1, 40 hours, level 2. And maybe ISO 9712 states it differently. Maybe they don't give the hours. It's been a while since I read it. From what I remember, they did have hours, but I'm just using an example.
Antonio, can you see my screen?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So this is what T120 says about ISO 9712. It has to be ISO 9712 2012 edition. And it may be used alternatively, used to fulfill training, experience, and examination requirements. So to answer the question, it's up to the inspector to accept what he accepts, but we don't prohibit it. As long as it's 9712 2012 compliant. Now, if it was earlier editions, we don't have any control over them.
Okay.
The reason we put 9712 in there, we, the committee, reviewed 2012 edition and found it to be in compliance with TC1A.
We worked heavily with the ISO committee in revising the 2012 edition.
Correct.
Do have a pending document that's going to put limitations on the use of 9712 and additional requirements, but that's not been approved yet for the 2021 edition. So I would expect changes in the 2023 edition. And, you know, if anybody wants to be involved in that, come to the meetings or participate in the meetings, and you can be involved in it. It's a consensus code. It's open to the public. And a consensus agreement means that we have to have at least 2/3 of the involved parties accepting what we change. So I would say if you don't like the rules, get involved and you can help change them. And we always welcome new personnel and new blood.
Well, I will take the advantage of your answer and ask, how can we do this? This is it's very important.
So right now, while we're meeting virtually, and in February, we'll be virtual again, it's a Zoom call and
Yes.
you participate. If you go to asme.org, there's a PFA and a PF1 form that you can fill out, and then we submit to me or to any member of Section 5 your resume, your CV, the PFA, the PF1, and a letter of support from your company. And we will add you to what we call the Resource Development Committee, which is our bullpen, our place that the new workers go so that they can learn how things are done.
Each committee has the same.
Also learn what people know and how we can use them. So they're assigned a 3-year membership to the Resource Development Committee, and that allows them access to the CNS Connect software, where you can go and review and work as project manager and look things up and learn how things are done in the ASME community.
What you have, the way it should take place is write a letter to the ASME staff secretary of that committee and let them know that you're interested in participating on committees. And they would therefore reply, please fill out the attached information with a letter of support for your company. It would go before our executive committee. We would vote on it. The reason we do that is to look at it and make sure we have all the pertinent information. And then, especially while we're still in Zoom, we're going to have Zoom meetings all as present all next year. And the personnel would be voted in. They would be in the resource development group, and they could have a word on any open committee that's within Section 5. All the committees that we have are open to the public except for one, and that's our executive committee or admin committee, where we go over procedures and things of that nature, internal procedures.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, can a specimen for a level 3 test qualification, for example, a digital radiography, be used for qualification in another technique, example, TOEFL, when referencing a procedure?
So you've made a specimen for radiography and you want to use it for ultrasonics.
That's right.
I don't see any reason that you would not be able to do that. Now, that's my opinion, not that of the committees, but I don't see any reason that the specimen cannot be used. The one thing that you have to be careful of, if you're doing a demonstration to where only the supervising level 3 is supposed to have knowledge of what the flaws are, then you have to maintain confidentiality of what the flaws are in that particular specimen.
And while we're on it, one thing I didn't talk about because I knew that we was pressing for time is that everyone that's experienced an NDE are fully aware that a volumetric exam such as radiography and ultrasonics that they are complementary. They're not supplementary. In other words, you may not find the same information. And a lot of people in management and even engineers at times do not understand that. The same holds true for surface exams, liquid penetrant and mag particle. I was involved in a job recently where a job was sent to China to manufacture, and it required a surface exam. The manufacturer, the customer, and the certificate holder all agreed would do mag particle on finished surface. It came back to the States. The owner decided to do some information NDE and did liquid penetrant instead of mag particle. And they started finding extremely small pores of porosity open to the surface. They said it's code rejectable. Well, we went back and applied the same magnetic particle exam that was performed in China, and the flaws were undetectable. Undetectable. They weren't missed. There's a difference. And I indicated
The methods are like that, though. In sidewall lack of fusion is hard to detect with radiography.
You're not going to.
It lights it up in ultrasonics.
It's going to be rare to see sidewall lack of fusion in radiography, based on the orientation of the flaw and the way it was radiographed. And ultrasonics going to find it. Now, another thing with radiography, if you've got a welder that's inexperienced, I'm not going to say unqualified, but he pushes the electrode in and he has what we call an icicle or dingleberry hanging down on the inside of the well, that's going to jump out at you on a radiograph. But you're not going to see it with the best ultrasonics out there.
That's pretty much correct. Let's get the next question, Antonio.
Okay. Is the ASME committee planning to publish any post-construction code with an emphasis on testing for vessels in Section 10 reinforced?
So we are currently working on, we have a record to develop either a PCC4 or a subpart Charlie C, or maybe Section 5 Division 2 for in-service inspection methodologies and applications. This would be complementary to the API 479 and that non-Section 11 NDE methodologies. There is work going on. I don't know what will be done by 2023, but I would expect we will at least have some rules by then. So that would be the end of 2022. We probably will be marching that direction. So yes, we do have plans to. Now you said specifically for Section 10, which is the fiberglass reinforced vessels.
That's right. This is the question.
Yeah. So we also have an article to develop other NDE methodology for Section 10. The issue that we've had over the years with Section 10 is that they seem to be more ASTM focused and less ASME Section 5 focused in their applications and their recommendations for inspection and examination. But yes, we have been working on that and will continue.
Okay, thank you. The next one is for T190, for T190, who is responsible for the orientation and for how long minimum?
Let me look at that and see specifically.
I'm sitting here on mute talking to myself. Antonio, could you repeat that question, please?
Sure.
T190 Echo.
Okay.
P19 echo.
Yeah.
Who is responsible
Digital
for
image.
the retention
Yes.
and for how long minimum?
That's up to the referencing code. So what we have seen is that, as I said before, I carefully packaged my radiography film, gave it to the customer's representative, and he threw it in the hole and covered it up with the weld. But also I've presented it to the people at Los Alamos National Labs, and they probably still have it. For Section 3 purposes, the current rules are that it will be maintained for the life of the plant, which in some cases is being extended to 80 years. Now we know that film will not last for 80 years. So there's a lot of efforts going on to say that retention of the film and retention of the report and the record of the examination are two different things. But each of the referencing codes specify what the time is for retention of records. It's not up to Section 5. We're the how to, not the how often. Does that answer?
What code are they working to?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow you.
What construction code does the question pertain to?
Oh, it's a good question. There is no reference.
Okay.
Let's go to the next one so we can get some more answers.
Yeah, correct.
If they want to reply in the chat what they're using, Section 8.
Sure.
Is that the answer? He's using Section 8.
Let me check here.
If we have time, Ned, then you can pull up the spreadsheet.
Okay.
No, I think let me just check one thing here, Luis. No, he's saying that it's already answered. So
Okay.
I think that you covered the question. The next one. During the manufacture of a pressure vessel that was X-rayed and repaired, can phase array ultrasound be performed to validate the repair?
I think we've already answered that no. That depends on the referencing code, but the referencing code that we quoted, and I haven't looked at Section 8, the referencing code that we quoted said that repairs would be examined by the method that detected the flaws in the first place. And I believe that's the case with Section 8, but I don't trust my memory.
That is correct. Section 8 says the same thing. In other words, if it's found with radiography, a repair is made, then the subsequent area that was repaired must be re-radiographed.
Okay, the next one. Can qualified inspectors, according to SNT TC1A, by the written practice of a service provider company, be able to inspect a manufacturer's product? Or should it be qualified according to the manufacturer's written practice?
I would say that the manufacturer's written practice would be the overriding document in this case.
The manufacturer had to be audited by the ASME survey team in order to get a certificate of manufacture. Their written practice indicated how the people are to be qualified and certified, and what area they pointed to in Section 5, TC1A, 9712, etc. So they have to meet the written practice.
The next one, an inspector, UT level 3, UT level 2 phased array, both by ISO 9712. Can he apply the tests for phased array qualification according to mandatory Appendix 2 of Article 1?
I think we've actually had that as an inquiry. And I don't recall what the answer was, but I think there was an issue that the 9712 didn't meet all of the requirements that we have in mandatory appendix 2.
Correct.
I don't really, I'd have to look. Do you recall, Wayne?
Yeah, that was our response, that the mandatory appendix 2 was written because TC1A did not go into sufficient depth concerning the number of samples, the extra training experience the individual had. And we could not glean that out of 9712. So what our response was, I'm pretty sure, I'm 99% sure that our answer was something to the effect that mandatory appendix 2 had to be met.
That's what I recall.
Okay, thank you. The next one, regarding SNT TC1A examiner level 1, there is a limitation to the evaluation and acceptance of the test under pre-established conditions in a SNT TC1A item 4.3.1 according to written instructions. Could you please explain about this, even if hypothetical, what conditions would this be?
So the TC1A, let me get there. Go ahead, Wayne, if you.
I don't have ready reference to that paragraph. So I don't know what it says. By the way, while Ned's looking, any unanswered questions, Antonio, please gather them and direct them to Ned and myself, either one or both of us, and we'd be happy to get back to you so you can get it back to the one that had the question.
Do you know what the TC1A paragraph was? 431?
I believe that's what it said.
431, that's right.
So we take exception in mandatory appendix 3 to 431. And what we say is that the level 1 individual shall be qualified to properly perform specific calibration, specific NDE, specific evaluations for acceptance or rejection determinations according to written instructions and to record results. NDE level 1 shall receive the necessary instructions and supervision from a certified NDE level 2 or 3 individual. So what we've said is that a level 2 or level 3 shall supervise him even in the application of acceptance criteria. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. Well, if it was who raised, it's Paulo. Paulo, if not, please let us know, and I take your further information to them. But as far as I understood, you have already answered the question. The next one, since Section 5 is widely used in Brazil, will the committee do a translate version for our country?
That's a question for ASME staff, not necessarily for the Section 5 committee. We can take that question back, or maybe ask Chris if he's still on the line to take that question back. I know that they do make translations in other languages for some applications, so that is possible.
Yes, we would seriously consider it. We have started to translate some documents into Portuguese. One of them that was just completed is BPE. So this would be a very good segue into that.
This is a good opportunity, right, to talk to you, Antonio, about future IWG, International Working Group, right, from Latin America, South America, Brazil. We've had inquiries from Argentina, I know.
We've also had inquiries from Spain, so I would assume that with
Correct.
Spain would come Portugal.
Correct.
So there is that possibility.
But if Section 5 is used to that great extent, it wouldn't be difficult to set up an international working group that would operate on the same premise, the same basis that Standards Committee 5 operates, and we would be in direct communication with that international working group as we are with the IIWG, the Italian International Working Group.
The Italian International Working Group is coordinating their activities with the Section 9 Italian International Working Group.
And Section 1
established for Section 9 in South America as well. So it might be a good opportunity to add some personnel to that committee and have a separate international working group for Section 5.
Correct.
We would support that in any way possible.
Section 1 and Section 8 is in a lot of different locations around the globe, around the world. And we could check with them to see if they have a IWG in Brazil.
I know Section 9 has one in Argentina.
Right.
Yeah. I think most of ours are in Argentina at this point. I know that we have 48 IWGs around the globe right now. And I do know that if we could get some people to step up and commit to participating, it would be very easy for ASME to come down, bring a few committee members down to help set up the group. I think Wayne and I went out to Italy. Oh my gosh!
I'd say, Chris, that this is a very good subject that we should talk, and I believe that the Abendi will be more than happy to work with you in ASME to make this happen.
There we go.
Especially regarding the Section 5.
Antonio, could I share the screen again?
Yes. Meninas, podem liberar o controle para ele?
Okay.
Are you seeing my Excel spreadsheet?
Yes.
So this is a document that we did. Wonder if I
Scroll back.
eyes
First.
There.
There you go. There you go.
So,
Reduce it a little bit if you can. There you go.
yeah, that's
That's a little harder to read, but that's okay. But you can see all the way across the top what we have. Yeah. Go back to the left-hand side.
so this is Section 1. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Section 1 requirements for the procedure. This is the actual code text, and this is what it points to. And we've gone through and we have this document for Section 1, Section 3, the different divisions of Section 3, Section 4, 8, Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, 9, 10. So you had a question about 10.
Yeah.
This is what Section 10 points to. As you can tell, they currently don't point a lot to Section 5. We've been trying to work with them on correcting that. Section 11, Section 12, B31, 31.3, 31.4, 5, 11, 12, 31Q,
A lot of work went into preparation of this. One of the members on Standards Committee 5, who happens to be chair of surface examination, put this together for the committee to know the variations within each code, how they reference Section 5 and
How they
personnel.
reference NDE procedure qualification and personnel qualification.
Correct.
So it's quite a document.
We could spend.
Oh, obviously we could spend hours going through this with personnel, and maybe Chris wants to set up another opportunity for us to do that. But, you know, I believe we've come to the end of our time.
I think
Yeah, and this is
would be very beneficial if we could have a follow-up with that.
What other questions do we have we could field with the remaining time?
No, we don't have a remaining time. Unfortunately, I hate to do this because it has been a very, very good conversation. And gentlemen,
gather the questions and get it to Mr. Finney and myself, and we'd be happy to respond.
and we deeply appreciate for this. And let me tell you, thank you very much for the outstanding presentation.
Yes, thank you, Ned. Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you, gentlemen.
I would like, well, let me just inform everybody, we will be back at 2 p.m. We have time for having a meal, and we'll be back at 2 p.m. I'd like to ask you, Ned, Wayne, and Chris to remain on the screen, because we are going to take the opportunity to get a shot, a picture, because we haven't had this opportunity yet.
Three good-looking guys. We're ready.
Wayne, you'll have to turn your camera on.
Vamos lá. Você consegue me ouvir?
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to turn my camera on.
I think they have to allow you to.
Yeah, let me speak to the ladies here. Paula, vamos tirar a foto. Você pode liberar a câmera do Wayne, por favor?
I got it. Yeah, I was just asked to start my video. I clicked on it. I don't see myself there.
We can see you.
You can?
Yeah.
You might move your camera to look just a little bit lower. Just no, other way. Not right there.
Well, I don't see myself, guys. Let me go through
We
here.
can see you.
Good-looking guys.